Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice. Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. It's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. That was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW!
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture
because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook for a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to these islands, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution because we know that the more life there is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forest on the land that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects a migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission, track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sales to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, an equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube-sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The unit units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Just warning everybody, I'm a little riled up. Tim just got a little piece of that.
I love it.
It's that kind of a Tuesday.
It's good energy, Carol.
It is good energy.
It's good energy.
Adrenaline good if it's put in the right place. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming on YouTube. It is Tuesday, April 20th. It's 4/20/2021, so we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But definitely investors a little spooked here because we've got U.S. stocks on pace for their first back-to-back drop since late March. I think investors just trying to figure out the early earnings, what they mean, and kind of where they go.
And also some, interesting stories playing out sector-wise. Yes. Yesterday's warning from the State Department about travel really spooking investors in cruise lines, hotels, sending shares of those companies lower on the day.
And don't look at the virus numbers over in India because it's a reminder that emerging markets really struggling. All right, we've got a lot to cover, including Netflix earnings after the close. But first up, let's check in on that trading day. 2 hours to go. Hey, Charlie Pellet.
Well, hello. Now you're sounding calm, and I can't wait to
It's
hear
you
what you're
and
all...
Tim. This is what you do to me. Who needs yoga? I've got you guys.
I got to find out what you're all riled up about. But here's what's going on. Speaking of riled up, let's begin with some of those travel names that Tim was alluding to. UAL, look at that stock hitting turbulence today. Parent of United down 9.7% right now. American tumbling 5.9%. Delta down 4.1%. Southwest down 3.8%. Catalyst for a lot of this, the earnings report out of UAL last night, lower now by 9.6%. Bottom line here, stocks down for a second, as Carol mentioned. Rising virus cases around the globe leading to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. Speaking of which, after the bell today, today. We will be hearing from Netflix. Right now, we've got the S&P down 33, a drop there of about 0.8%. The Dow down 305, down 0.9%. NASDAQ down 145, a drop there of 1%. NASDAQ 100 index down 0.8%. Gold up 0.4%. 17.78 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%. 62.46 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. And on this 420 day, shares of the ETF MG Alternative Asset Harvest ETF, that's ticker MJ, it is down now by 4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Let's get to the Market Drivers Report. And let's set the Business Week agenda. Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News on the remote access in New Jersey. You know, Dave, taking a little bit of a breather here. I'm taking a personal breather. The market's taking a breather as well. But let's not forget, for the broader market, we have been on an upward trajectory for the last month.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, to see a bit of a retreat, which is really what we've got going on here, not exactly a surprise. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that to the extent that anything's holding up the S&P 500 at this point, it's the interest rate sensitive areas of the market. Utilities and real estate, the best performers among the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500. Financial stocks among the worst performers, along with energy and industrial companies. So it's kind of a different look than we've seen lately, where some of the more economically sensitive groups have been market leaders.
So when you say interest rate sensitive, you're saying lower rates better for these names?
Absolutely, because you think about utilities and real estate. I mean, they have a lot of debt, so you have to be concerned about what's it going to cost them to finance that debt. And you're also talking about stocks with relatively high dividend yields. So to the extent that, you know, these shares compete with bonds in terms of, you know, trying to get investor money, you know, the idea of, you know, lower bond yields is a plus for those stocks.
Hey, Dave, I want to talk a little bit about inflation, higher commodity costs. We learned today that Procter & Gamble is boosting the prices of some consumer products as they grapple with higher commodity costs. Are we going to see this more than just on a company-by-company basis, and is this something that investors should be concerned about?
Yeah, we already have to some extent, because P&G is certainly not alone in taking that step. You know, and it's something to watch as we go through first quarter results. You know, to what extent are companies sort of setting up to deal with cost increases, and you know, will investors, you know, be satisfied that they're on top of the situation and can pass along those higher expenses? I mean, that's always the question. You know, with companies, how much pricing power do they have? You know, P&G seems to be okay at the moment in the sense of looking at the stock. It's higher by 0.8%. You know, other companies may have a harder time.
Hey, look, I thought what was interesting, Dave, I was looking at how broad-based the selling was today in comparison to what we saw yesterday. And let me just pull up my major industry groups in the S&P. It's not as broad-based. I mean, there's 4 groups, but as you mentioned, it's those interest rate sensitive areas in particular. But I do wonder, you know, what can we say about the broader trends versus yesterday? Is there anything to pull away? I know also small caps are taking a big hit today versus the broader market, the bigger caps too.
And they did that yesterday as well. Okay. So it may be that, you know, investors kind of pulling back on some of the riskier bets, or the ones that have run up more, because we've certainly seen that in the case of the Russell 2000 index, for example. You know, it's now basically in line with the S&P 500 for the year after having run out ahead in the past couple of months. So, you know, a bit of a broadening, you might say, of what we're seeing in the market. So, you know, put it all together, I mean, it's hard to argue that a couple of days really changes all that much, but, you know, here we are kind of working our way through earnings, and maybe that's, you know, more significant than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, speaking of earnings, we have Netflix after the bell. We heard already from J&J. We've heard from Travelers, Philip Morris International, P&G, as I mentioned, United Airlines yesterday, Dave, IBM. What are the themes that are starting to emerge for you after hearing from the banks last week?
Well, I mean, certainly what you're referring to as far as inflation is going to be something to watch as we go through. To what extent are companies seeing their costs go up, and are they in a position to manage those increases and maintain their profitability? That's going to be a key point, because we know the demand is there. Certainly with the kind of economic growth that we saw in the first quarter, I mean, that much is clear. It just the issue now is, to what extent does that kind of carry forward and become an issue for companies? Can they count on consumers or their customers more generally being willing to pay higher prices? That's going to be a theme to watch.
All right, you're going to watch the earnings theme as well, too, with Netflix and others?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Netflix, talk about stay-at-home stock. What are they looking at as things kind of open up and people decide they can get away from their screens?
Yeah, okay, so I talked about this with Lucas Shaw earlier this week on Quick Take.
Did he say nobody's going to want to walk away?
Well, Netflix is like the old stalwart, right? Netflix is the one that invented it all. Netflix is the company that, the content has certainly shifted, right?
Yeah.
You don't have available what used to be, but it's like the one that I think people keep. And this is anecdotal evidence, but it is losing market share, but it kind of doesn't matter because the market is growing so much.
Because they're the behemoth.
Yeah, exactly.
They're also, right? I mean, Dave, we see that consistently.
Oh, sure. And they're doing everything they can to maintain their status with all the money they're spending on new programming, trying to bring new customers in. So, put that all together. It's going to be an interesting sort of dynamic, because it's clear that Netflix doesn't have the playing field to itself the way it did even a couple of years ago. There's so much competition from the likes of HBO Max and Disney Plus, and you name it.
Okay. All right, Dave. Thank you so much. Dave Wilson's going to be back a little bit later on with his chart of the day. Let's do the bite of the day.
It's one number that tells us a lot. It's brought to you by GEP. GEP helps businesses transform supply chains with strategy, managed services, and AI-based cloud-native software. Learn more at GEP.com.
So today's number, Tim, is 80. The U.S. will change how it issues travel advisories, which may result in about 80% of countries being considered no-go zones. The coronavirus pandemic is continuing to pose an unprecedented risk to travelers. That coming from the State Department yesterday. We mentioned that headline when it crossed the Bloomberg. And travel advisories are being updated to outline current issues affecting travelers' health. The CDC now recommending that people delay international travel until they are fully vaccinated, adding that even those who have been inoculated are at increased risk for getting and possibly spreading new COVID-19 variants. Although, gotta say, I heard an interesting Hopkins interview this morning that basically said, if you're vaccinated, you can kind of resume your life.
I like that message.
I do too.
That's a great message.
And he said he was kind of out in front ahead of everyone
Great.
else on this.
You're vaccinated. I got mine on Sunday.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Open up the door.
Yeah.
The world is
Let's
our
do
oysters. All right, let's get to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Carol. Cities are bracing for possible violence when a verdict is read in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. That could come at any time. It's day 2 of deliberations. President Biden says he spoke with George Floyd's family yesterday.
They're a good family, and they're calling for peace and tranquility, no matter what that verdict is. I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict, which is, I think it's overwhelming in my view.
Biden says he's only offering that assessment since he knows the jury is sequestered. Democratic senators are expressing concerns over Republican efforts to push what they view as a wave of voter suppression laws in states across the country. Senator Dick Durbin opened a hearing today pointing out what he believes is behind it.
More than 360 bills with restrictive voting provisions have been introduced in 47 states. But make no mistake, they are a deliberate effort to suppress voters of color.
Durbin's Republican colleague, Senator Chuck Grassley, defends the push for stricter laws, saying voters want secure elections. Authorities in suburban New York City are looking for a gunman who shot 3 people, killing one of them today inside a Stop and Shop grocery store. Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder said the store had lots of people inside when the shooting happened.
We probably had a couple of hundred shoppers in the store at the time. You saw the line trying to get out. We stopped the question to make sure we have anybody that was a witness.
Ryder says the suspect was armed with a small handgun. They believe he may have been a store employee. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. So Tim and I want to bring you guys a story. Reading this in this morning, and I've been kind of following it over the last couple of days. Our Mark Cudmore reporting on India specifically, and he says the whole world has a COVID-19 problem in India specifically. And we've talked about the 7-day average global case count in India has risen by more than 30%. This was from about 3 weeks ago. I think he was looking at it. The vast majority of the increase is due to India alone, or actually I think that global case count, the world case count is up by about 30%, I think, in the last 3 weeks, he's saying. The vast majority of the increase, though, due to India alone, where the 7-day average case count is now more than 4 times higher and still rising in a parabolic fashion. I mean, it is just off the charts.
Yeah, it is. Mark Cudmore sent us a package that we played on Quick Take earlier today. I encourage everybody to check it out. That really explains the situation that's happening in India right now. But if we think about what's happening, and we're seeing it play out in New Delhi too, is the health system in some areas of the country are being overrun. And when the health systems are overrun, that's when deaths increase because they don't have the resource to actually take care of all the people who are sick.
Which is really, really troubling. And listen, this is something we talked about with our Andy Brown yesterday about, the right thing to do in terms of the developed world, helping the developing world. And we've talked about that a lot on air, but also there are economic and global ramifications. Investors, as Mark writes, are underestimating those global ramifications. With almost 18% of the planet's population and the 5th largest economy, he's talking about India, it's not just the high risk of further dangerous virus mutations in such an uncontrolled outbreak. The country accounts for more than 12% of the world's labor force, according to the World Bank. So when you think about disruptions there, disruption to the global labor chain, you do wonder about what kind of impact that could potentially have, Tim.
Yeah, we've learned so much about supply chains from a consumer perspective over the last year because of what happened with COVID and because of what happened in the Suez Canal as well. But what happens in one country has ramifications for other countries and worldwide, not just because of mutations, but because of disruptions to the economy and, of course, the labor force.
And it just means COVID just goes on longer and longer. So certainly something we're keeping an eye on, and I've got to believe that that's part of what's in investor psyche right now. This is Bloomberg.
stocks, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Sources tell Bloomberg Microsoft and video game chat company Discord have ended their takeover talks. They say that Discord is now focused on a potential public listing. Microsoft shares, they're lower now by just about 0.3%. We're looking at a down day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining. Let's begin, though, with the NASDAQ 100 index down 0.8%. The real damage today, though, being done among small-cap stocks, with the Russell 2000 down 2.4%. Stocks are lower for a second day as rising virus cases around the world lead to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. S&P down 32 now, a drop of 0.8%. The Dow down 313, down 0.9. NASDAQ down 1%. And again, worth repeating, the Russell 2000 down 2.4%. 10-year yield, 1.55%. Gold up 0.4%, $17.78 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.4%, $62.50 for a barrel of WTI. Lots of earnings after the bell, including Netflix down 0.5%, Tenet Healthcare down 1.7%, CSX, the railroad, down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. So earlier this month, Quidel got FDA emergency use authorization from the FDA, Tim, for their at-home rapid COVID-19 antigen test, even if an individual doesn't have symptoms. The FDA continuing to approve tests from multiple companies as a tool in dealing with COVID-19. So Doug Bryant is president and CEO at the publicly traded life science and testing diagnostic company, Quidel. He joins us on the phone in Chicago. Hey, Doug, good to have you here with Tim and myself. How are you?
Thanks, Carol. I'm doing great. Hi, Tim.
Hello, hello.
So tell us about this emergency use authorization and tell us a little bit about your test specifically and what it can do.
Well, our test was cleared recently, among other authorizations, to allow folks at home to test themselves serially, even if they don't have symptoms. And in doing so, a number of studies have indicated that this type of testing can be done reliably and therefore prevent people who are infected from going out into their communities.
Hey, Doug.
Their moms.
Doug, I just want to jump in because you said something that caught my attention. Serially. Explain what you mean by that. It obviously means, more regularly, more than one time. But why is that the right type of testing to do?
The data, that's a great question, Tim. The data actually suggests that if I test on day one and I'm negative in a given week, and then I test 24 to 36 hours later and I'm negative, then I can reliably go visit my mom. I can reliably go to work. I can reliably, as a student, go to school. I can give people peace of mind at work because we're all testing each other. That we can be there safely. I can have people who had previously not been coming into work. They weren't necessarily critical in terms of manufacturing or R&D. In order for me to ensure that those folks can be in a safe environment, we're, in my company, going to test twice a week. The data actually suggests 2 or 3 days, depending on the performance of the test or technology, would be required. So that, Tim, is what we mean by serially. We're testing at least twice a week.
And also talk about the idea that it's an antigen test versus, we're all learning so much about things that we didn't think we'd learn about a little over a year ago, right? I walk by an urgent care and it says they do rapid tests, but also PCR tests with results in 4 to 6 hours. What's an antigen test?
So an antigen test is an immunoassay, meaning I'm using antibodies to look for something. In this case, we're looking for proteins, specifically the nucleocapsid protein that's inside the capsule of the virus. So in these tests, we extract that nucleocapsid protein from the virus, meaning we break open the cell wall of the virus, we expose that protein to some antibody that's looking for that protein that's usually on a solid phase, meaning in this particular case, nitrocellulose film. So these are very commonly used for a number of different infectious disease. They're the predominant way that we detect influenza, strep, and other infectious diseases, and it's well suited for this type of testing here. But again, we're looking for the presence of the nucleocapsid protein, very specific sequences of that protein that we're looking for, compared with PCR. And it's kind of funny, Tim, that we have people running around saying PCR when they don't actually know what PCR means. But in this particular case, we're looking for RNA fragments of the virus itself.
Okay.
And so there's two different ways to do the same thing. One is deemed to be generally a little bit more sensitive, and is shown to be that in trials. The other is deemed to be usually quicker, easier to run, and more readily available, with and without instrumentation.
Hey, Doug, just got about a minute left here. I am curious what this test costs. And I'm also curious about false positives, having had to deal with a false positive personally in my family, and it can really create some havoc. So just quickly, just got about a minute left here.
Sure. On the pricing, we will have multiple thoughts in terms of pricing. In the retail segment, we've established an MSRP. I think we've seen our colleagues at Abbott already in the market at a 2-test kit at retail for under $24. I think that's probably the right price point, but at the end of the day, it's the retailers that set price, not us.
Okay.
In terms of false positives, it's a great question, Carol, because when your prevalence is super low, it's likely that if you do get a positive, it is going to be a false positive. And that does happen. And therefore, it's really important in this environment to, once we do have a positive by any technology, it's wise to rerun it and potentially rerun it with a different technology.
Got it. Doug, we've got to run, but look forward to touching base in the future again. Doug Bryant, President and Chief Executive Officer at Quidel, on the phone from Chicago. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic in our Interactive Broker Studio. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
So we've got a daily check on the virus.
We did that.
Check.
Okay, daily check on Dogecoin?
Yeah.
Is that what you were going to
crypto.
say?
Yeah, totally. Because it's kind of,
good.
I feel like every day we're just like, okay, where are we with Dogecoin, Bitcoin, and the like?
I'm going to make a prediction here, Carol.
Dun, 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 dun.
We're not going to keep doing it for Dogecoin.
Okay.
This is a flash in the pan. That's just, I could be
I
proven
am
wrong.
just waiting for it to come.
Wrong. We'll ask Katie Greifeld.
Yeah, it could get ugly, I'm feeling. Yeah. All right, let's see what she has to say. First of all, let's see what Charlie Pellet has to say when it comes to your top business stories. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Going to lead off with Coinbase, down now by 3.2%. Speaking of crypto, we have got Bitcoin, lower now, little change, down $19. It is down by less than 0.1%. Stocks lower across the board. We've got stocks very close to session lows, at least on the S&P now. We'll begin with the numbers, give you some color and why in just a moment here with the S&P down 38, drop there of 0.9%. The Dow lower by 360, a decline right now of 1.1%. And NASDAQ is slumping 170 points, down 1.2%. NASDAQ 100 index down 1%. The real damage, though, small cap shares, Russell 2000 slumping now by 2.5%. 10-year yield, 1.55%. Gold up $6 the ounce, higher by 0.4%, $17.77 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, $62.44 a barrel. Stocks are lower for a second day as rising virus cases around the world lead to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. S&P extending its slide from a record. Johnson & Johnson posted stronger than expected first quarter sales as the drug maker awaits a ruling from American health regulators on whether use of its coronavirus vaccine can resume. J&J up right now by 2.4%. As for the rollout of vaccines in the United States, what about a drop in hospitalizations? Dr. Amish Adalja is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
And I think once we get to around maybe 40% of the population fully vaccinated based on Israel, I think we'll start to see a decline in cases the way they did. But we've already seen benefits in terms of hospitalization, as we've talked about before, because our older individuals who were taking up hospital beds, the ones who were most likely to have severe complications, and that's not happening so much anymore because how many of them have been vaccinated.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Again, taking a look at some of the vaccine names. Pfizer up by 0.5%. BioNTech, the German partner, the ADR is up 4.6%. ADRs of AstraZeneca up 1.2%. Moderna is down 3.1%. Johnson & Johnson up by 2.4%. Recapping, we've got the Russell 2000 down 2.5%. S&P down 39, a drop of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So fans are definitely driving Dogecoin higher, and it's kind of interesting.
You can't say it without laughing either. I can't.
To mark a day known for celebrating pot smoking because they were trying to get to that, 42-cent mark?
Hashtag Doge Day.
It has jumped, though. You know, you laugh, but Dogecoin has jumped more than 400% and now has a market value of more than $51 billion, Tim. $51 billion.
I'm shaking my head.
Okay, me too. So let's get into it, what we need to know. Venmo also coming out and allowing customers to buy, sell, and hold cryptocurrencies. What we need to know with Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Katie Greifeld. She's on the phone in our New York City bureau. Where shall we begin on this?
You guys are really down on Dogecoin. I think it's almost beautiful
in the doghouse. That's all I'm going to say. Ba-dum-bum.
I mean, it's just based on nothing. It's purely speculative. It's just people having fun. It's not trying to be anything. It's not. You know, Bitcoin, crypto advocates are trying to pitch it on balance sheets, put it in your portfolio. Dogecoin, I don't think it's ever going to be the reserve currency of the world, and I don't think it wants to be.
Do people know this? Do they understand what it is about?
I think, if you look at some of the memes on Twitter and TikTok, because, this is where this is all being created, this push into Dogecoin, it does seem like everyone is in on the joke, that there is nothing backing this. It's not for real. And, you still could lose money, but a single Dogecoin will cost you about 34 cents right now. So
a lot more expensive than it used to be.
It is more expensive, but it's not, Bitcoin at $56,000 a coin now.
So, Katie, I'm going to out you a little bit, but I know you spend a lot of time in the Wall Street Bets forums on Reddit. You do spend a lot of time looking at this stuff online and what's actually happening in the forums. What's the conversation about Dogecoin that's happening right now online?
It's actually fascinating, Tim. And, I'll admit, I spend a lot of time on Twitter. But it's interesting that you are seeing a sort of fissure in the crypto community right now, because you do have the, crypto advocates, people who are trying to really do serious work here and present crypto as a real asset class. And then you have the Dogecoin crowd who are just having fun, making memes, punting Dogecoin around. So you are seeing this fissure. I've been talking to a few crypto investors about this, that it opens the crypto community up to criticism, because just this unbridled speculation is something that the crypto space is trying to mature past. So the Dogecoin mania, it might sort of slow that process down.
I mean, are people going to ultimately lose a lot of money here?
It's a good question. I mean, with any sort of, just wild speculative asset, if we look at GameStop, people absolutely got crushed here. And it's the same sort of push that's fueling this Dogecoin bid, that people want to be in on the joke. They want to participate in the game, and the game right now is pushing Dogecoin to $1. I mean, obviously, the price tag is completely different, but if you put a lot of money in Dogecoin, you should be prepared to lose it, because again, there's no fundamental backing here. It's based on nothing.
Yeah.
At least GameStop is a company.
And at least Bitcoin, there's this is a point that Mike McGlone makes all the time, Katie. Bitcoin, there's a limited supply of Bitcoin, but with Dogecoin, they're just printing it, right?
Exactly. There's no cap on supply here. You can't even make the scarcity argument that you could with Bitcoin, as you point out. So again, just no fundamental backing. Its price is entirely determined by what someone is willing to buy it at.
Kate, $51 billion is a huge market. I mean, are most of the bets on it small players just taking a little piece of this, or do we have anybody who's like a whale in this market potentially?
If there is a whale, I would love to find them and talk to them. But as far as I can tell,
but if they do something, they could make this market unwind in a heartbeat.
Absolutely, because I mean, you have seen a big retail bid here, but this is not a very liquid market. I mean, it's minuscule compared even to Bitcoin. So you could make waves if you were to buy, I don't know, however much you want, a big amount. But still, I mean, I'm not sure that anyone is actually doing this. I mean, institutions, sure, they're starting to embrace Bitcoin a little bit, but that narrative doesn't exist for Dogecoin.
Hey, Katie, we only have about 15 seconds left. Are we still talking about this in a week, or is it going to be over?
I hope so. I'm having so much fun.
Oh, you hope we're still talking about it? Okay,
Should
cool.
we be talking about it in 2 weeks? Just quickly.
Probably not. Hopefully we're focusing on earnings.
Because you know what? That's actually fundamentals.
Exactly.
Good stuff. Katie, thanks. Katie Greifeld, cross-asset reporter at Bloomberg News. She is in our Bloomberg New York City bureau.
Dogecoin, fundamentally awesome.
Dogecoin.
Okay.
It's a dog. Or what is it?
It is.
All right, let's do some news with Nancy Lyons. She's out in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. President Biden has spoken with the family of George Floyd as jurors continue their deliberations in the trial of the police officer charged in his death. Floyd's brother, Phalonis, talked about the phone call on NBC's Today Show.
He knows how it is to lose a family member, and he knows the process of what we're going through. So he was just letting us know that he was praying for us and hoping that everything will come out to be okay.
Floyd is also encouraging people to be peaceful following the verdict. Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. Faces up to 40 years in prison. Cities across the country are preparing for the verdict. In Los Angeles, a federal judge has barred the city's police department from using foam or rubber bullets on peaceful protesters in any demonstrations over the outcome. In Washington, city leaders have sought help from the National Guard to prepare for protests, but they were assigned a quarter of the Guard troops that were requested. Former Vice President Walter Mondale is being remembered as a role model for future generations. He died yesterday at the age of 93. Senator Chuck Schumer eulogized him today on the Senate floor.
Vice President Mondale will be remembered as a lion of progressive politics, an ardent defender of civil rights, aid to school children, child care, health care, and consumer protection.
Schumer says as President Carter's right-hand man, Mondale revolutionized the role of the vice presidency. President Biden says when he first arrived in the Senate in 1973, Mondale was one of the first people to greet him. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. So listen, we're all watching this very closely. And President Trump's 2017 tax law disproportionately, as you know, targeted Democrats in high-tax states. It eliminated a popular federal tax deduction.
Are you familiar with it, Carol?
State and local taxes. Yes, indeed. And listen, you and I have talked about this, especially when it comes to East Coast, West Coast. There are disproportionately, it's just a higher tax rate. It's just where you live, the services.
California,
it's just different.
New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and as you mentioned, they all have one thing in common. Blue states.
They're blue states. And there was a lot of reporting about this when President Trump made it difficult and basically put that cap, that $10,000 cap on deducting state and local taxes or SALT. And so what's interesting is that is now an issue for some Democrats in some swing states. And there's a lot going on here. You have to think about President Biden looking to do this massive spending plan. There are Democrats who are like, first, what I want is I want a rollback of this, and I want this capped on.
And there's a reason, because their constituents, some of them are paying through the nose. So according to newly released Internal Revenue Service data from the IRS, in some New York congressional districts, the average deduction that was lost due to the SALT cap being gone can be more than $100,000 a year. That's according to IRS data.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And of the 40 congressional districts with the largest SALT deductions disallowed under the Trump law, 39 are represented by Democrats. And so one New York Democrat who's emerged as a leader of the bipartisan SALT caucus, Tom Suozzi, he said, I'm not voting for any change in the tax code whatsoever unless there's the restoration of the SALT tax deduction. I'm laying that shit on the table. Listen, the bargaining, the horse trading begins.
Yeah, it does. I wonder to what extent it's actually going to be possible. Of course, they do need a lot of Democrats to be on board with Biden's plan, because Democrats have this slim majority in the House, 218 to 212.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to watch this and see the back and forth that continues. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. We're going to get to a story in the magazine upcoming issue. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
World headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are lower. We're bouncing off the bottom on the S&P. Very close right now to the lows of the day, down 0.9%. S&P slumping 39 points, extending its slide from a record. Investors showing caution ahead of the brunt of the earnings season. S&P down for a second day as rising virus cases around the globe lead to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. The Dow is down 354 points, down 1%. Nasdaq down 171, down 1.2%. 10-year yield 1.55%. 10-year up 13.30 Gold now up $6.51 the ounce, up 0.4%, 17.77. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5% now, 62.44 a barrel. Among the companies reporting earnings after the close of trading today, Netflix down 0.7%. Tenet Healthcare lower now by 1.6%. CSX down 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here in our Interactive Brokers studio. So like many industries, the music industry really faced doom at the start of the pandemic. Yet as Bloomberg's Devin Leonard writes, for all of its unsettling moments, the past year has actually been pretty good for record company executives. Devin checked in with one in particular. So sharing what he found out is Bloomberg Business Week Project and Investigations reporter Devin Leonard. He joins us on the phone in New York City, along with Joel Weber, Bloomberg Business Week editor on the Access line from Brooklyn. I've already decided the character in this story, Joel, he needs like his own reality show.
Yeah, I mean, well, he's kind of living his version of that. And, you know, this story sort of actually began pre-pandemic when Devin was like, we should like figure out what the music industry is like right now. Because, you know, in the era of streaming, like the things have changed. And what Devin kind of found is that for executives in particular, streaming era is pretty great, but, you know, musicians can often feel differently. But Kevin Liles is really the person that Devin's story centers on. And what has Kevin's journey been like in the streaming era, Devin?
Well, I think, you know, I started reporting this thing, before the pandemic, and I was trying to find somebody who'd sort of been through, the up times and then the down times and then the, come back around times, with streaming. So when I caught up with him, originally in, February 2020, he said he was, he was 51. He said he was having the time of his life, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hits, and that's all because of streaming. Pandemic hits, it looks like streaming starts to dip, and then streaming just goes through the roof. Spotify subscribers, were up for the year 17%. Apple's were up 32%, and record companies get a huge slice of all of the, the revenues from those streaming services. So he's riding that, but he's having to deal with all these artists who, who can't tour and, are depressed, and his staff, all these people, young people working in, the little New York apartments. So he's, I think it's been great for him, living out of his big house in Cresskill, New Jersey, but he also has a lot of people to tend to and sort of play therapist to.
What's he telling them? How is he getting them through this? I mean, this is a difficult time for everybody, but for people whose livelihoods obviously depend on touring, and for artists who expected to be able to tour to back up a new release, it's been really detrimental to them. Well,
I guess the company, gave a lot of people home studio equipment, and so they'll keep recording. They also supplied a lot of them with PlayStation 5s to keep busy. I mean, some have continued to do really well. Young Thug, one of their artists, he had 16 songs on the Billboard, top 100 in the last year. Megan Thee Stallion, had her debut album, in November, that was hugely successful. She was nominated for 4 Grammys, won 3. So I think some people, especially in sort of pop and hip hop and maybe country, are doing better, are doing okay, maybe in streaming. But a lot of other people, they weren't making a lot of money in streaming to begin with, and then when the touring money went away, they really got socked. And I talked to one of those folks in the story who's very famous too.
What's Kevin's take, though? Like, there is such a battle between those who produce music, those who distribute it, whether it's music company executives or streaming services. What's Kevin's take on this in terms of, people who produce music having more control of it and ownership? I have to say, there's one tidbit in your story about David Crosby, who, because he couldn't tour, he had trouble making his mortgage payments, and that led to him, selling his songwriting catalog. Like, I couldn't even get my head around that. Someone as successful as him finding, and listen, we all manage money differently, but nonetheless, you would have thought he'd be okay.
Well, Carol, I think, as he said, I think that's also more common than you think, and that's one of the things that I think figured in the minds of a lot of people, who sold their songwriting, catalogs around this time. There are certain kinds of music that do really well in streaming. Like I said, hip hop and pop, but I think a lot of older music, may not be streaming as much, and I think for those folks, they had to make some tough decisions. But that, along with, they're also facing the prospect of higher taxes and higher capital gains taxes, and that figured into people's decisions as well. But it's been a really tough year, and it's still not clear exactly when people are going to be touring again. Going over to other countries, going to Canada, going to Europe. When's that going to happen? We don't really know yet.
Devin, I'm curious. You got to hang out with Kevin and crew. Just what was it like to hang out with him?
It was really fun. I mean, that was the whole thing. Last spring, I ate lunch at that barbecue joint with Kevin and the rapper, and I thought that was fascinating just to see how he relates to artists, and I kind of really wanted, I was kind of begging them to let me do more of that with him, and then they were kind of hesitant, and then the pandemic hit, and the story didn't come out, and then they were bothering me. Are you going to write the story? And finally I said, hey, listen, I'll write the story, but you have to really let me hang out and do more of that, with Kevin. And they said, well, okay, we'll let he has something he's going to do in an afternoon where he's going to go out and see Fetty Wap in the studio and give him a big plaque. So I wrote along with that. No, it's Kevin's really funny. You can just see how you can see why he's so successful, why he has all these relationships. I mean, I've watched him in action. That's not that stuff is real.
It's why I want to be Devin Leonard when I grow up. I'm just going to put that out there, Devin.
You can beg people? Yeah, right.
Hey, Devin, I wonder what happens on the other side of the pandemic to the industry. And, given that it has been able to adapt and that artists have been able to find this with Spotify and with Apple Music and with virtual touring and home equipment, what does it look like? And what does it look like for people like Kevin Liles?
Well, they're going to be in great shape. I mean, the fact that, in the U.S. alone, 83% of the music industry's, the recorded music industry's revenues come from streaming now. That's great. That's solid money. That's why, even in the midst of the pandemic, the Warner Music Group, I guess, they went public. The world's largest music company, Universal Music Group, they're planning to, an IPO later this year. I mean, you have to remember, they were dealing with piracy, the death of the CD, even digital downloads weren't doing that great. The continued growth of streaming is heaven sent for them. Whether or not, it works for all artists is another question, but for record labels, it's fantastic. And it's going to keep being fantastic.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Next time you're going on, road trip with these guys, Tim's available,
Oh, yeah.
I'm available, Joel's available. We'll just, come along with you. Devin Leonard, thank you. Projects and investigations reporter. He's always a fun read. Bloomberg Business Week, on the phone in New York City. Check that story out in the magazine this week, along with Joel Weber, editor of Business Week.
We're going to get vaccinated. We're fully vaccinated soon, so we can do this stuff.
We can totally be there with Devin. All right, for those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week, we're going to continue. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business is coming up next. We're just going to take it out with some music, folks.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this 420 Tuesday, April 20th, and we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all lower across the board. Right now, S&P 500 index at or near the lows of the day. S&P down 41 now, a drop of 1%. The Dow is down 366, down 1.1%. NASDAQ is down 185, a drop there of 1.3%, but perhaps the real focus today on the Russell 2000, dropping now by 2.7%. Stocks lower for a second day as rising virus cases around the world lead to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. S&P extending its slide from an all-time high, investors showing caution ahead of the brunt of the earnings season. Again, that 10-year yield 1.56%, gold up 0.4%, 17.77 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude now lower by 1.5%, 62.44 a barrel. As for the economic outlook and what it might mean for bond yields, Kathy Jones is chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab.
We think that the economy will continue to pick up, that we'll see more inflation pressure as we go forward, that it won't necessarily all be transitory, and that yields will push up towards that 2.25% area.
As for the economic outlook and what that is doing for travel stocks today, we've got travel shares lower, airlines specifically, after United's report last night. Right now, UAL is lower by 9.1%. That is United Airlines Holdings. American Airlines Group down 6.2%, Delta down 4%, Southwest down 3.7%. Apple rolling out the first redesign of its flagship desktop iMac computer in almost a decade. Apple shares lower now by 2%. Recapping, S&P down by 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
So it's Wednesday, 4/20, 2022. No, it's 2021.
Carol,
I just want to be.
I'm not even going to touch that, okay?
It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday somewhere. I just want it to be 2022. It's 4/20. You know what that means. It is my husband's birthday, but that's not what we're talking about. I know.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It's also become known officially, unofficially as the marijuana holiday.
Yeah, it's official.
It's official.
I think it's
Google
official.
it because they're still not quite sure the connection. There's lots of reasons why.
It's official.
More importantly, though, the cannabis business, it's a big one and growing. Bloomberg reporting at the start of the year, Tim, that the cannabis industry is finally going to hit the gas pedal in 2021.
And look, it makes sense. Increasingly, we're seeing states on a state-by-state basis make it legal, not just for medicinal, but for recreational. There just needs to be a federal law to make it okay for these companies to handle something that's not cash.
One and done. So let's bring in Kim Rivers with some thoughts on the state of the business. She's CEO of the cannabis company True Leave. It's a seed-to-sale, vertically integrated cannabis company, and she's with us on the phone in Florida. Kim, so good to have you here. How are you? What's your year been like?
Oh, I am great. Happy 420. And so it's a fantastic day to be joining you today. And the year has been incredibly busy. But we've been very busy really since the beginning of last year. We saw incredible increased demand throughout the COVID period, and are now, as we come out of COVID, kind of have a little bit of a rebalance in terms of how our customers are doing business with us, but demand remains very, very strong across all of the states that we do business in.
What does that rebalance mean? You say demand is strong. Is it not as strong as it was? And just talk to us a little bit about the rebalance.
No, it is. So what I mean by that is when we entered 2020, so to give you a couple quick stats, for our business, and we have, at that point in time, I think we had about, around 50 or so stores open. And so during that time before COVID, we had about 70% of our business was walk-in. So just folks coming into our retail stores. About 20% was, call ahead or online pickup. And then about 10% was delivery. At the height of COVID, obviously that behavior changed dramatically. And so about 60% was online or pre-orders for pickup. About 20% was delivery, and then a small, about 10% 50% was walk-in business. And so we're seeing that shift back a bit, although interestingly, and I don't think this is unique for cannabis, but for a lot of retailers, interestingly, the pickup, the online ordering channel has remained very strong. So that's still at around between 50 and 55%. So that certainly was very sticky, with deliveries going back down to that 10% number that we saw pre-COVID. But demand overall remains incredibly strong. So if we just use Florida as an example, when we exited 2020, there were about 2,500 patients every week, Florida's medical program, entering the program in Florida. Now in 2021, the last 10-week average is at about 5,500 patients per week entering the program. So yeah, so it's been incredibly strong for 2021 as well, in terms of new market entrants into across really all of the states. In Pennsylvania, also a market that we're active in, that the patient profile there and demand also is very, very strong in 21.
Kim, I want to get your thoughts on HR 1996. It's called the Safe Banking Act. The U.S. House of Representatives passed it, and this would give state-authorized marijuana businesses easier access to banking services. This has been tough for U.S. business owners because you guys have been dealing in cash, right?
Yes, so we deal in either cash or we have partnered with a company called CanPay, which if you think about it like a preloaded card, so I'm a Starbucks addict, so a preloaded Starbucks card is the easiest example. And we're just starting to see some workarounds on the debit card side, but to your point, yes, it is primarily a cash-based business.
So this is a big deal. Because, I mean, look, the Democrats have tried to pass this before, but they haven't controlled the House and the Senate previously. So if this goes through, that's really good news for you guys.
Yeah, and it's good news for us. So, I mean, I will just tell you that certainly in terms of being able to have, alternative payment methods is a big deal. And it's certainly a big deal for our consumers. And from a safety and security standpoint, we do have armored car service, and we, deposit directly into the Federal Reserve. So we've eliminated as many of those risks as possible to date. And we are able to bank with state chartered banks. We're just not able to bank with federally chartered banks for obvious reasons. So that would change that landscape. I would say more importantly, though, potentially, is the fact that we also don't have access to normalized banking or lending tools. Right. So when you look at rates that cannabis businesses are forced to take, it's with really subprime, lenders or more predatory rates. So some of my peers, for example, have been forced to take debt on at 15% to 20% interest rates because again, there's no access to normal tools. We can't get mortgages. We can't have business lines of credit. So that coupled with, the federal provisions under 280E, which are taxation laws, we also can't take normalized deductions. So we don't have things like normal business deductions, whether that be depreciation or, expenses that you would normally be able to deduct as a business. And so those two things together make profitability very, very difficult as a legal, under state law, cannabis operator. And so safe banking would certainly help on that first piece to again give us, of course, being able to take other forms of payment, but also being able to work with larger institutions and have access to normalized lending and loan tools.
Kim, got about 40 seconds and then we'll do some news and come back and then continue the conversation. If 280E is lifted and that tax law is changed, just quickly, 35, 40 seconds here, what would that do to your profitability picture?
Yeah, so last year it would have saved us about $63.5 million.
So making you much more profitable.
Yes, much more profitable than we were. I mean, we do run a profitable business currently, but yes, it would be a great help.
All right, that's real money. Hey, listen, sit tight, Kim. We're going to come back and continue the conversation. Kim Rivers, she's Chief Executive Officer of Trulieve, on the phone from Florida. As I mentioned, they are a seed-to-sale vertically integrated cannabis company. And listen, a lot of folks have said because of what happened in the November elections, more states embracing it, we're seeing some movement in terms of policy. This could be a big year for the industry.
One thing I've been thinking about all day as we've been talking about this is just how it has become normal. I mean, a few years ago when I was in graduate school, some of my classmates had to petition the school to add a cannabis club as a club for business.
Right. So it's moved pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It feels like.
It does.
All right. Something we're certainly going to continue watching in 2021. Let's get to news.
Yeah. Nancy Lyons is in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. It is a waiting game as jurors continue to deliberate in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former officer accused in the death of George Floyd. Protests are expected whatever the verdict. House Republicans say they plan to push to censure Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters for saying protesters need to, quote, get more confrontational. Waters made the comment yesterday during a visit to suburban Minneapolis, not far from where the Chauvin trial is being held. House Whip Steve Scalise says Waters was out of line.
I'd like to see Maxine Waters apologize for the inflammatory comments that she's made inciting violence. It's a powder keg down there.
Scalise says the last thing you want to do in the Chauvin case is make it worse. Waters says she will not be bullied by Republicans. President Biden says he is praying that the verdict is the right verdict and says he believes the case is overwhelming. President Biden's push for a $2.25 trillion infrastructure plan is facing a big roadblock from some of his fellow Democrats in high-income states. They're pushing to get rid of the cap on state and local deductions from former President Trump's 2017 tax law. And Bloomberg Government's Emily Wilkins reports some new figures from the IRS may explain why.
Some districts in New York, the average tax break that was lost thanks to the cap is more than $100,000. And that comes out to taxpayers losing tens of thousands of dollars in deductions.
Emily Wilkins reports the White House has been resisting calls to restore the SALT deduction. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
It's definitely a new day when it comes to Credit Suisse. And a couple stories. In fact, this is the most read story on the Bloomberg terminal in the past 8 hours. It has to do with Credit Suisse pausing the launch of a credit fund run by star trader Hamza Lemsuger. I'm not sure I'm saying it right, Lemsuger. Basically, what Credit Suisse is doing is it's dialing back risk in the aftermath of the twin implosions of Archegos Capital Management and Greensill Capital. This is according to folks familiar with the decision. But what's interesting is Credit Suisse last year lured this star trader from Ken Griffin's Citadel, gave him a new role overseeing the launch of a credit strategy in the asset unit, fund targeting as much as $500 million in assets, according to an investor update seen by Bloomberg News. But listen, they have to deal with this crisis, two crises, in fact, and have to kind of relook at possible risk that might taint them in the future.
Yeah, you
or cause them
named
problems.
The twin crises, right?
Yeah.
These of Archegos Capital Management and Greensill Capital. It comes as Credit Suisse is trying to move past those. The debacles triggered sweeping changes by the company's CEO, who cut the bank's dividend, overhauled its leadership, and also is considering spinning off the asset management unit.
It's like a big deal. Keep in mind, Credit Suisse was forced to take a $4.8 billion write-down tied to Archegos or Archegos, whichever way you want to say it. They removed their risk chief. They replaced a veteran that was head of asset management. At the same time, there's just a lot going on at this firm. Credit Suisse's prime brokerage co-heads are also leaving the bank in the wake of that nearly $5 billion loss from Archegos Capital Management, according to a company memo. We're talking about John Dabbs and Ryan Nelson. They're going to step down immediately while assisting Credit Suisse through mid-May on an orderly transition, the bank putting this out in a memo.
Yeah, Roger Annarella was appointed interim head of prime services. Doug Crofton was made head of America's Cash with responsibilities for execution and advisory sales, and Stuart McGuire put in a similar role for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Credit Suisse representatives did decline to comment.
Like, listen, they have looked at all of it, looks like their credit risk offices and positions, and a lot of folks are leaving the company as a result.
The question we had was, how long is this story going to continue? And it has continued, and this with changes at the banks.
Yeah, exactly. This is Bloomberg.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Do want to begin with a developing story headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service sports headline out of Europe. Manchester United's Executive Vice Chairman Woodard stepping down. That, according to a report from Sky News, it comes as England's Chelsea soccer team is preparing to withdraw from Europe's proposed breakaway league shortly after its announcement provoked anger among politicians and across the sports community. Right now, let's find out what's happening. Let's head right over to the breaking news desk. It is a down day on Wall Street. And once again, here's Bill Maloney with today's afternoon call.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks under pressure from the start today. The Dow's currently down 290 points. S&P's dropped 32. NASDAQ is lower by 150. The U.S. 10 yield at 1.56%. Gold is up 6, and transports rise 65 points. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, utilities and real estate were in the green. Energy and financials were weak. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, IBM and J&J, while Nike and Boeing led to the downside. After earnings, IBM rose 3.6%. Philip Morris gained 2.9%. And in other news, J&J's COVID-19 vaccine rollout to resume in Europe. In deal news, Discord ended deal talks with Microsoft, and Canadian National bid $33.7 billion for Kansas City Southern. That tops a $25 billion proposal from Canada Pacific. Wrapping things up, Netflix reports after the bell. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie.
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. Netflix now down by 0.6%. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet. Let's get right back to Kim Rivers. She's CEO of TrueLeave, joining us on the phone from Florida. Kim, let's talk more about the industry at large. One thing that I was surprised to learn earlier today from my colleague Tiffany Carey, who joined us on Quick Take, is even in areas where marijuana is legal for medicinal or for recreational purposes, the illicit market continues to thrive. Just 1 in 3 cannabis consumers in the U.S. buys from established brick-and-mortar stores. That's according to a survey published this month by New Frontier Data. The most popular source remains the user's friends, while another 20% get their weed from dealers. How do you change that?
Yeah, and I think that, first of all, there has to be access, right? And it has to be easy and convenient for customers. And so even when we talk about, in Florida, for example, we have delivery, which is oftentimes, next day or even same day. However, the process to get delivery is very onerous for customers. So you have to be present, you have to sign for it. There's this whole transaction that takes place, and it's like waiting for it. In some cases, can be like waiting for the cable man, right? Which no one wants to do that. So I think in some cases, we need to make sure that cannabis is as convenient as the black market. In many sophisticated black market areas, it's doorstep, it's quick, it's convenient, and so I do think that access and wider access is really important.
So what does that look like, though? Does that look like delivery? I mean, does it look like? I'm just trying to think of what.
I think it's a full omni-channel experience,
Okay.
right? I mean, I think that certainly it does look like delivery.
It's like Amazon
for some, and Amazon, right? Like Amazon. I mean, when we think about now, I don't think that tomorrow we're going to have drones leaving cannabis on doorsteps.
Well, Amazon doesn't have it yet either, even though they've been talking about it for years.
Don't say never.
Yeah, but I do think that, right, I do think that when you think about even how far, alcohol delivery has come over the years and or, convenience to alcohol, again, we have to make sure that this isn't getting in the hands of children. It is a regulated product. There certainly are going to be certain barriers and it will remain a regulated industry. However, I do think that if the goal is to compete head-to-head with the black market, there needs to be 1, access, and 2, education. And 3, right, we have to be price competitive and product competitive with the black market as well. And so, which, again, taking another cue from alcohol and how we came out of prohibition with alcohol, a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were able to educate customers on the safety, right? And how, how it was safer to actually consume products from a regulated distributor as opposed to someone making bathtub gin. So I think similarly, right, and we saw that a little bit with the vapegate crisis that happened last year with out in California and on the West Coast, additives being added to black market products that were very, very harmful for customers when inhaled. And so I think that as, again, more widespread regulation happens across the country, hopefully at the federal level, consumers will certainly, be drawn to safer products.
Hey, Kim, one question I want to ask you, and just looking at your background, I mean, you spent several years in private practice as a lawyer where you were specializing in mergers and acquisitions. And I look at the cannabis industry and I'm just thinking it might be ripe for some more consolidation. What are your expectations there? Is that maybe in the game plan for you guys?
Absolutely. I believe that that cannabis is certainly like any growth industries, and as they evolve, right, there will be consolidation and meaningful consolidation across the industry. Certainly, also as we see the federal landscape shifting. So we already have been active in the M&A arena, and we plan to continue to be active in that space. So certainly for us, and then I would assume for many others, I think that you absolutely will see consolidation happen over the next, I'll call it 24 months.
But deals you anticipate here in 2021 for you guys to continue?
Sure. So we just announced, right? We just announced a deal in Pennsylvania. We've been very vocal about the fact that, our strategy has always been to go deep in states and in markets that we decide to invest in. And so Pennsylvania is no different. We've embarked on a hub strategy where we're looking at full supply chain across the U.S. and wanting to make sure that we're adequately positioned, again, in an ever-evolving landscape, but then, of course, doing so in a way where we can maintain profitability during this growth cycle. And so, the Northeast is certainly a hub that we've been very focused on now, but we're also looking at opportunities in the central and Southwest and Northwest areas of the country as well. We think it's very important to get position, but again, wanting to make sure that positioning is prudent, not only for the long term, but also, of course, for the short and midterm as well.
Kim, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just very quickly, very quickly. Federal legalization countrywide or states one by one happen first? Yes, which one?
Well, certainly we're living
seconds.
in states one by one now, right? So, I think that's now. But, I think that, if we leave it to the Senate and Senator Schumer, certainly I think we'll have a proposal at least for more broader legalization sometime this year.
He did say today he wants to do it.
This could be the year.
Yeah, it could be.
Definitely feels that way. Kim Rivers, thank you so much. Stay in touch. Chief Executive Officer, Trulieve, on the phone from Florida. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. Coming up next, we're going to track the markets, and we're going to do it as only Dave Wilson can do with his chart of the day.
Yeah, I'm also seeing some more breaking news here. The verdict in the Floyd death trial is set for between 3:30 p.m. and 4 p.m. local time. That's Minnesota time.
All right, so looking for the outcome there in that trial. All right, let's get back to your top business stories. Once again, here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much indeed. 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks close to session lows right now. Right to the numbers. We'll give you the why in a moment here. S&P down by 32 points, a drop of 0.8%. The Dow is down 300 points, down 0.9%. NASDAQ down 148, down 1.1%. Small cap U.S. companies bearing the brunt of today's sell-off. The Russell 2000 lower now by 2.9%. 10-year yield 1.56%. Gold up $6 the ounce, up 0.4% at $17.77 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, 62.44 a barrel. Stocks are lower for a second day as rising virus cases around the world lead to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. Johnson & Johnson did post stronger than expected first quarter sales as the drug maker awaits a ruling from American health regulators on whether use of its coronavirus vaccine can resume. J&J up now by 2.1%. As for the rollout of vaccines in the U.S., what does it mean for people who've already gotten their shots, and are they a risk to others? Dr. Amos Adalja is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
To me, I think in terms of risk tolerance, I'm not worried about vaccinated people spreading this virus. And I tell people to go back to their life as much as possible once they've been fully vaccinated. I seem to be a little bit ahead of some of my colleagues on this, but that's how I think these vaccines are working. And we have real world data from many countries like Israel that show that transmission does go down. And there's even data from Pfizer that it's very hard to even be infected if you're fully vaccinated.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Checking some of the vaccine names, Pfizer shares are up 0.3%. ADRs of its German partner BioNTech up 3.8%. ADRs of AstraZeneca up 1.2%. Moderna shares, they're lower by 3%. Johnson & Johnson up 2.1%. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Hint. Let's see. You could call them the Sultans of Swing.
Oh, well, they are the Sultans of Swing, right?
Dire Straits?
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Done, Tim.
Nicely done.
Wow.
No, it's the little things.
Once you said that, it was like, bam.
Nice.
Good job, kiddo.
Thank you.
Nice
it only
guess.
took one hint and 5 minutes of the song playing.
That's okay. You got
And the
there,
song,
though.
by the way, is called Solid Rock, and it is no accident.
All right, so why?
Well, you know, you think about something solid, you think about a building, right? So, you know, companies have decisions to make all the time. Do they go out and build stuff, or do they just buy it, you know, taking over another company, let's say? And this is an issue that the folks at Bank of America, their research investment committee, to be more accurate, they first kind of broached it in the middle of last year and said, you know, we may be looking at a capital spending boom because it's gotten so expensive to buy rather than to build. And they revisited the subject the other day in a report. And, you know, in the interim, it's gotten even more expensive in relative terms. The way you judge it, it's this indicator that's known as Tobin's Q, where you compare, you know, the market value of companies to the value of their assets, which would be, their replacement cost. So think about book value as a way to determine that. Well, in the middle of last year, you saw the Tobin's Q go above its peak from the first quarter of 2000, when a bull market was coming to its peak. And then it moved even higher at the end of last year. This is a quarterly number because that's how often the Federal Reserve provides the underlying data that's used to calculate this. You were talking about market values being 264% of replacement costs overall. So it's gotten even more expensive in the 10 months or so since the folks at Bank of America first proposed this theme. So they've come back to it and said, we may be looking at the biggest capital spending boom in 40 years.
Hey, this is good. This is good news, right? For the U.S. economy?
I think it would be good news for a lot of companies.
Well, for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's good if they actually do it.
Yeah.
Right? I'm curious how great an indicator this is of actually showing, companies going off and doing CapEx spending. Because I feel like, Dave, we have talked about capital expenditures and companies kicking in on it for a long time, and then they just don't do it.
Yeah, we have. They were making the point in the research, Bive, was that, maybe the pandemic has given companies more of an incentive to bring production and other assets back to the U.S. rather than being overseas, because we've seen what has happened to supply chains in the past few months, the way that things have been interrupted. So that's another part of their argument as well. It's not strictly based on this ratio, but this is one indicator that really jumped out of the research. And if you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Well, listen, we talked about this in one of our Beyond the Bell segments about kind of looking for, I think Caroline Hyde mentioned this, looking for different metrics, Dave, to kind of figure out what happens next in terms of companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that, it gets people's attention. More of an academic kind of indicator, arguably, but one that does have some sway here.
So I'm wondering when, it's companies are so flush with cash right now, right? So when are we going to start? Are we going to start to see them actually spend this money?
You want to know
CapEx?
when,
Yeah,
Tim Stanovic?
I know, I do.
How dare you?
It's like they don't know what to do with all this cash.
Well, and they're working their way out from under the pandemic, so we'll probably get a better handle on things as we go forward in the next few months, once we see how the figures look. May I mention my stock of the day?
Please do.
Okay, it's a company called Tiptree. The ticker is TIPT. Shares set a record today. It's a financial services provider, and its insurance unit, Fortegra Group, is moving ahead with plans to go public. So look for that at 4:15 New York time on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn.
We love your stock of the day. All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much.
Let's get a check out world and national news. Nancy Lyons joining us from Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. Well, the verdict is in on the Derek Chauvin trial in Minneapolis. We do not yet know what the verdict is. It's going to be read between 4:30 and 5 p.m. Wall Street time. Earlier today, the White House called for any protest to be peaceful.
Our focus, as we're working with state and local authorities, is on providing the space for peaceful protest, regardless of what the outcome of the verdict is.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the president will have more extensive remarks after the verdict is announced. The top watchdog for the Secret Service reportedly blocked investigations into the agency during the final months of the Trump presidency. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reports.
According to internal documents and sources, the Washington Post reports the Homeland Security Inspector General rejected a recommendation to investigate the Secret Service role in clearing George Floyd protests, the day then-President Donald Trump posed with a Bible in front of a burned-out church last June. The IG, Joseph Kafari, also reportedly limited a probe into whether Secret Service agents followed COVID protocols in the Trump presidency's waning months. Hundreds of agents were infected as the president held campaign events during the pandemic. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
The search is ongoing for a man who entered a Long Island, New York grocery store this morning and started shooting. Nassau County police say the gunman killed a 49-year-old man and wounded 2 others. Stop and Shop corporate management says they're shocked and heartbroken by the act of violence, and their hearts go out to the families. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. This story has been trending high on the Bloomberg terminal today. Has to do with hedge fund giant Marshall Wace is ringing alarm bells about the booming SPAC market after building up long and short bets on blank check companies that total more than $1 billion. So he's going in big, but he's also taking kind of both sides of the equation here.
Yes.
Trading equation.
Yeah, that's right. So saying, quote, the SPAC phenomenon will end badly and leave many casualties, Marshall said. He also disclosed that the firm has more than $1 billion of gross exposure to SPACs in its flagship $21 billion Eureka hedge fund.
Yeah, he said the billionaire, the story, it's great by our Nishan Kumar. He said in his conversation with him, the billionaire not holding back, the SPAC structure could even have been designed to encourage the bezel, he said, referencing a term coined by economist John Kenneth Galbraith to describe the period in which an embezzler has stolen money, but the victim doesn't yet realize it. And so listen, more than 300 SPACs have raised in excess of $100 billion this year alone. We see more scrutiny and regulatory overhang. Last week, just U.S. regulators cracking down on how accounting rules apply to a key element of blank check companies, which raise money through IPOs and seek private companies to merge with. I mean, it has exploded this market.
It has. I mean, I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, Carol, but there was a time earlier this year when each and every day there were new SPACs being formed. It's slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
But what we've seen playing out in the market, here we have the IPOX SPAC index at Bloomberg. It fell for 7 straight days. It's hit a 4-month low. That was as of Monday.
Well, and the thing is, there's a lot of money out there and how it has to be put to work. And it does have a time frame which it has to put that money to work by, buying a company, doing an IPO, if you will, essentially. And so if that money isn't put to work, then ultimately those investors are going to have to return it. But what's interesting is I know a lot of the SPACs in terms of what they priced at, a lot of them I think are trading, as you mentioned, the index, trading below that.
Well, to your point, Carol, about finding acquisitions, there's so much money out there looking for acquisitions, and they're competing with private equity too. So what if they don't find something they want to buy?
Right, exactly. Family offices are involved. Like there's so many money competing for different companies. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all lower. And we are awaiting the latest numbers after the bell from Netflix. Netflix shares lower now by 0.4%. Also reporting CSX, the railroad, down 0.2%. And Tenet Healthcare Corp, ticker THC, it is lower by 0.8%. Stocks down for a second day. Rising virus cases around the world leading to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. S&P 500 extending its slide from a record, down 26 points, down 0.6%. The Dow down 266 points, now down 0.8%. NASDAQ down 120, a drop of 0.9%. 10-year yield 1.56%. Gold up 0.4, 17.78 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, 62.44 a barrel. So again, recapping, equities are lower, off session lows right now with the S&P down 27, a drop of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
You know, it's a busy day when you need more Bloomberg terminal screens. I already have 4 in front of me. I've got online, I've got this, I've got that, and yet I need more screens.
You need 5.
Or 6 or 7 or 8. Let's get to the drive to the close. Jana Barton is back with us, co-director of growth equity at Eaton Vance, on the phone in Boston, and she manages the Eaton Vance Focused Growth Opportunities Fund, and joins us on this Tuesday. Jana, good to have you here with us. How is the market for growth and growth opportunities right now?
The market for growth is always bright and cheery, unlike the screens this morning. I think it's sort of indicative that while the data continues to be very supportive of the equity market, you're kind of due for a pullback because the sentiment and expectations got a little bit ahead of themselves.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little, because depending on how you look at it, stocks in the U.S. could be expensive, right? Evaluation, American equities are trading at 35% above the average of the past decade. What causes a pullback here? Is it if these companies don't deliver when it comes to earnings?
That's exactly it. And I think if you take a step back here in sort of mid-April, the market has done a lot of work. You've got S&P before today up over 11 percentage points, which in normal times is a full year's return. So the market has done a lot of work anticipating better than sort of feared results. And the earnings results are coming in very strong. But what's interesting is that the stocks are not moving up with those earnings and revenue results. Only half of the stocks are actually moving up in price post these better than expected results. So I think you have to be very active and selective right now. It's not, the good news is not bad news necessarily, but I think right now the selection is key, particularly in areas of the market that have done a lot of work today, like industrials, for example. Even if we have really good earnings and revenue results from that sector, it's still expected to be down year over year when compared to pre-COVID levels on this sales line. So I think that's where investors can do a lot of good when they start sort of deciphering between all good news or opportunities that are still ample for investors over the long term.
So I have to say, and I know you don't like to pick stocks, so I'm not going to ask you, but your portfolio holdings read like a who's who. Oh, okay.
We do.
Well, but okay. So, but your portfolio, Jana, reads like a who's who among some of these fast-growing companies, these momentum players, whether it's an Amazon, a Microsoft, PayPal, Alphabet. These are all in your portfolio. We're going to hear from Netflix today. So you are among those that do have to make some decisions and pick companies or decide where you're going to allocate new money. What are the types of names you want to be allocating new money to if on a dip right now or in today's environment?
Well, many of the names that you mentioned were winners in 2020 and have been considerable laggards year to date. I mean, you mentioned Amazon, you mentioned Visa, you mentioned even the likes of PayPal. And that's an opportunity for us. And even within the pharma and biotech space, we have a lot of names in our top sort of overweight positions. And I guess that's the point of being active and selective. The fact that the narrative hasn't really changed for these companies, particularly within the long-term opportunity as we think about digital economy continue to take a greater share of the overall economy. But perhaps people have gone to sort of this reopening and cyclical trade a little bit too much. And perhaps now one might reconsider secular growth stories alongside these stable and cyclical stories, many of which you just mentioned. So the story hasn't really changed. In fact, we think many of them are actually, a value opportunity for some if you're looking to look out 3 to 5 years.
Hey, Jana, given that valuations are so high right now, I'm wondering what you tell clients who come to you with cash. Do you tell them to hold off and wait for a pullback? I mean, timing the market, it hasn't proven easy in the past.
Yeah,
I bet Dogecoin isn't in the list of
you got
suggestions.
a Dogecoin reference in here. Happy Doge Day, Carol.
Thank you very much.
That's a great point and a very difficult question to answer. I think we always say that it's time in the market rather than timing the market. That's really important. But you bring up a really good point about timing the market right now, because what we've seen to date, I mean, S&P 500 hasn't seen a drawdown of greater than 5 percentage points. And on any given year, it's usually twice that level. So there's going to be volatility in store. And I think the answer is you dollar cost average into your long-term opportunities, many of which are across the board. They don't have to be in one stock. They don't have to be in one style. There are plenty to be had. And again, I want to highlight that as a growth manager, we actually see a lot of those opportunities within traditionally defensive areas of the market that we believe can offer both growth as well as that quality balance sheet, consumer staples, industrials, healthcare again, and even pockets of consumer discretionary.
But over when we talk dollar cost averaging, you're talking over how long of a period of time?
Years.
Yeah.
That's what investing is all about, years. And I think a true investor measures whether they've done well or not in years. Listen, equity is a long duration product, and one should therefore measure success or failure in those terms. And if your window is shorter than that, then you're a trader, and there's plenty of opportunities for those as well. I think the market, as we look at it today, presents plenty of opportunities, whether you define yourself as an investor or a trader. We believe that investing over the long term is how you really generate capital appreciation.
Well, and it's interesting. So are you anticipating then, are you part of the bullish camp that, we're going to be in maybe a productive and positive equity market for the next, year, 2 years? I mean, what's your visibility here?
I say the short answer is yes. If you look at just the macro data points that are coming in, we are slashing all records. I mean, you look at expected real economic growth activity, nominal growth activity. You look at earnings results. You couple that with insights into the consumer that is at the strongest point that we've seen on record in terms of its balance sheet and pent-up spending. So I think this really bodes well for just the continued sort of bullish leanings of investors. But this is the time where you don't want to be passive. This is the time where you look at what has lagged the market, again, those areas of the market that I mentioned, and lean into those and buy them on days like today, because the market is being sold off across the board. And that's the opportunity. The opportunity is there's always a bull market somewhere, and we think that there's plenty of opportunity for investors, again, that are investing for longer than just, weeks or a month.
Hey, Jana, just very briefly here in 30 seconds, just thinking about what we've been talking about today with the rising virus cases outside of the U.S. and India getting hit so hard, the U.S. State Department advising people not to travel to 80% of the globe. We're seeing a pullback in travel stocks as a result of that. How concerned are you?
Well, we knew that COVID was the sort of known unknown of 2021, and every day that passes, I think there's a confirmation of that, particularly with what you just cited. And I think it also, again, demonstrates this uneven recovery and the fact that you just don't want to get ahead of yourself when you're sort of thinking about reopening trade globally. U.S. is in a very different spot as it relates to just COVID vaccination trends and activity versus particularly the emerging markets and areas of the market that you just mentioned. So that's why I think, again, investing with an eye of being selective and knowing the time horizon is very important.
All right, Yana, good to check in with you. Yana Barton, she's co-director of growth equity at Eaton Vance on the phone from Boston. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by our Bloomberg TV team for Beyond the Bell, live on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg TV, YouTube, counting you down to the closing bell on this Tuesday.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
All right, about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day, 41.34 on the S&P 500. Romaine Bostic, Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell, our global simulcast starting now. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic jumping into the ring, bringing together our Bloomberg television, radio, and YouTube audiences. And guys, we're seeing a bid to the dollar, we're seeing a bid to the VIX, we're seeing a bid to treasuries, no bids into stocks.
No, not at all. We're just going to finish off our lows of the day here. And listen, you know, Romaine, this is a day where I said I didn't have enough charts of my Bloomberg because I wanted to track things. The broader market certainly taking a hit. Those small caps in particular, Romaine, also taking a hit.
Yeah, that's right, Carol. We're actually seeing right now, look, this sell-off hit 2 days in a row. There are virus cases that are climbing globally, really hitting some U.S. companies hard, overshadowing some pretty good results that we've seen over the last couple of days. But the concern is that the virus, when it might be getting better here in the United States, if it doesn't get cured around the world, if it doesn't get treated around the world, we continue to see hotspots. That is going to affect the reopening globally.
And Tim, I think what we noticed yesterday was it was a sell everything day as yields were also higher as stocks came lower. And then today, Caroline, that changes. Bonds indeed do catch a little bit of a bid on the 10-year. We were down to the lows that we haven't seen since March 11. So really coming down just a little bit, 4 or 5 basis points across the curve.
The haven bid not only going into U.S. Treasuries, going into gold as well, as Romaine pointed out, going to the U.S. dollar. But this really does feel as though globally it was a sell-off too. Remember, Europe getting hit the hardest in 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. 1777 on spot gold here in the U.S. right now. Taking a look at equities, S&P 500 looking like it's going to settle around that 41.34 level, down 0.7%. The NASDAQ composite down, you can call it a percent, 13.778 is basically where it's standing at the moment. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down about 0.8%, and the Russell 2000, that is your underperformer here on the day, down 2%, 21.88 on the Russell.
Listen, certainly some disappointment when it comes to earnings. We are front and center when it comes to it, and this is what investors are focusing on. I think they're very hesitant.
Yeah.
Listen, we've got Netflix coming out, Caroline, and that's certainly going to be our focus right now.
First quarter earning revenue meeting estimates, we understand. 7.16 billion is where we get the number for the fiscal first quarter for this juggernaut. 7.14 billion had been the estimate, so totally in line. Earnings per share, $3.75, ahead of expectations of $2.98. But what we want is the streaming paid net change. It was phenomenally lower. Remain 3.98 million added. The market wanted 6.3. Netflix guided to 6 million. This is a big miss, Remain.
Yeah, this is a big miss, and you wonder where folks got it wrong. A lot of analysts were starting to say that the street was a little bit too bullish on the prospects for this 6 million number here in this quarter. But to come in at under 4 million, that's a huge miss, guys.
Yeah, the company also guiding for the second quarter significantly below estimates, coming in at 1 million versus estimates of 4.4 million. As you mentioned, Romaine, those streaming paid net change in the first quarter of the year significantly below expectations. Stock is significantly lower in after hours, trading down more than 10%, Romaine.
Yeah, down more than 10% here. And look, I mean, this is a growth stock, and with it be a growth stock, you have to continue to see that growth here. I know, Taylor, you're digging in here. We need to kind of find out a little bit more about the cash situation here, because that was a huge component to this story. It wasn't just the streaming, but it was also the idea that that balance sheet was looking pretty healthy here. And this was a company, despite all the money that it was spending, Carol, that this was a company that still was managing to stay on level footing on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. And take a look at that stock. You guys have it up for TV, but for the radio folks, it's down about 11% here in the after hours. It was one of the high flyers in 2020. We definitely saw a little bit of a pullback coming into this year, certainly. Netflix, though, talking about the outlook, this is what we need to know. We knew first quarter was going to be a blockbuster number. We know that those numbers were kind of off the charts. We know the pandemic. And listen, from the get-go, they kind of said, we understand a lot of people are home streaming. It's going to be different once the world reopens. Netflix, though, saying, Romaine, that they continue to anticipate a strong second half.
I have a question for you, too, because, I mean, we talk about the big bump that we saw during the pandemic, and there was this idea here that this would be sticky, that essentially once we got out of the pandemic, we would still be continuing to watch Netflix and HBO Max and all these other streaming services. And I wonder, Carol, whether this is maybe an indication that, you know, once we get back out of the house, we don't need Netflix as much as we used to.
Well, listen, you got to believe either the airlines and the hotel owners say we're going to get out there and we're going to be traveling, or the Netflixes, et cetera, and streaming services say, Taylor, that we're going to be sitting home watching everything and anything.
As we do for our global audience in TV and radio, I describe the charts that we show, and frankly, all you need to know on radio and YouTube is it does not look good, you guys. As I take a look here, as our team races to update this, fewer than 4 million subscribers, we should say. Reminder, that estimate was about 6.29, and really that second quarter, Tim, going forward, looking at 4.44, the company saying it'll just be 1 million going forward. I just want to bring you, Tim, update on the financials that we're getting. Net cash from operating activities, about $777 million. So that's better than it was the previous period. Free cash flow, $692 million. So they are looking to be 2021 free cash flow break even. But again, it really is that free cash flow number positive, almost $700 million. That, for me, looks above where analysts were looking at, but we'll have to dig through those numbers more.
Yeah, to the point that we were talking about earlier, where there is uncertainty as the country and the world tries to get past this pandemic. Roku stock is down too. I'll mention that as you said. Netflix continues, though, to anticipate a strong second half, but seeing some uncertainty from COVID-19 in the short term. Guys, I got to say, I've covered streaming for years. I've covered Netflix for years. The company prides itself on how easy it is to subscribe, but also how easy it is to cancel. So if you are done watching what you want to watch, you just cancel it so easily. There are no hoops to jump through, and that could be an issue if people run out of what they want to watch.
And here's the headline on the free cash flow that we were saying. Yeah, track for 2021 free cash flow to be about break even, as we're hearing from Taylor, an all-important number. But it's also about what comes in the second half in terms of content. Content is king. When you've got Disney Plus hot on your heels, when you've got the likes of Paramount Plus coming out, Discovery Plus, have you got the right sort of content? Stranger Things is going to be coming back into the mode, but at the moment, we are hearing that they are guiding for a stronger second half. These were tough COVID comps, Romaine. We've got to remind ourselves.
Well, Caroline, I think you raised this question with Tuna Amobi at CFRA a little bit earlier here about this idea of competition. I mean, I look at my own household, and I mean, we have probably 5 streaming services on our TV now that we didn't have a year or two ago. And I mean, at some point, you're going to have to look at that and say, do we really need all these?
Yeah, exactly. We've done it. We've done cord cutting, but all of a sudden you start piling on the streaming services and you're kind of back there with a pretty hefty monthly bill. Caroline, I think you hit on it. We have to remember the comps. The last quarter, it was the most that we saw in terms of services added individuals, 15.8 million. That was off the chart, so you have to have some perspective. The other thing is P&G talking about raising prices. We have to see if Netflix on the call says that they've got some leeway to make up and that they're able to start charging customers more. We'll see, Taylor, whether or not that can happen.
Yeah, we also, they're talking about repurchasing some stock, guys. This might help bump the stock up a little bit more. 5 billion common stock beginning 2021. So they're going to be putting their cash to work, not only on content, but also repurchasing some of their stock overall. They say the first quarter streaming paid memberships were 207 million, slightly below, again, the estimate of 210 million. I'm interested, Taylor, to understand the regional breakdown, because where the growth is meant to be coming from is not the US anymore, which is meant to be about 500,000 for the fiscal first quarter. But we were looking for EMEA to pick it up, for LATAM to pick it up in particular. I want to know the regional breakdown.
That is the top 5 question that we are getting from analysts of Lightshed Partners. We know him well. What needs to happen to get India to 50 to 100 million subscriptions? That is his number 5 question on the call, Caroline. So I think you nail it as we think about international growth. I've increasingly heard not quite verifiable. It is those international customers that create the higher margins. The U.S. customer is a little bit less sticky when you think about a profitable customer. How do you get that when international and the competition has really been increasing, Romaine?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about the broader market impact here, this obviously could weigh on sentiment tomorrow. But keep in mind, this isn't a highly weighted company in the S&P 500. I think it's ranked something like in the 20s or 30s here. So it will have an impact, but not the type of impact that if we had seen an Apple or an Amazon miss like Netflix missed today.
Hey, one thing I'm going to be looking for on the call today is any commentary about content production, because we know that content production has been slowed down globally due to the pandemic. And if there's nothing to watch on Netflix, then you're quitting Netflix. And that's the issue that the company faces. So a big question that I have is how the company is going to continue to bring us that new content as more and more places are opening up, but also there are hotspots emerging and they're trying to juggle this during the pandemic.
Yeah, Romaine's going to put down My Octopus Teacher and he's going to go straight over to HBO Max, where he's going to be looking about pottery, apparently. That's where it's hot. But overall, we are still seeing strong margins
Have
coming
you seen
from
this pottery show? It's on HBO Max, by the way. I've been a convert. I wasn't into HBO Max. I saw it. It's British. You would like it, Caroline. You like everything British, right?
Seems niche. I do. Great British Break Off, a great pottery throwdown. I'm all into all these things.
Yeah. All right,
I'm
guys.
still trying to finish Lupin at the moment, so that's my Netflix calling.
Yes,
but
yes.
So you will be streaming. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, more to that.
Carol's got us figured out.
All right, Discovery and Disney a little bit lower in the aftermarket too. We're going to have to be watching for news on theirs. All right, that's going to do it for our cross-platform coverage of the closing bell on this Tuesday on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, and YouTube. We'll see you same place, same time tomorrow.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, yes, indeed, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, watching Netflix in the after hours following a disappointing number, but you got to keep it in perspective. Netflix had been warning for months that in terms of new subscribers to their service, it wasn't going to be like some of the blockbuster numbers that you saw during the pandemic. And shares of Netflix, just a reminder, they're down about 10% in the after hours. Remember, that stock really took off last year.
Yeah, I'm just looking up Roku right now in the after hours. Disney down about half a percentage point when this news hit. Roku down about 4.3%.
And Discovery was down a little bit lower as well. And all of these are making big bets on streaming. All right, you have a good evening.
Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Let's get off to World and National News. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Well, we are waiting to hear within the hour from jurors in the Derek Chauvin trial. A verdict has been reached on the second day of their deliberations, but no specifics on what that verdict is. Earlier today, President Biden hinted at what he hoped it would be when he spoke about a phone call he had yesterday with George Floyd's family.
They're a good family, and they're calling for peace and tranquility, no matter what that verdict is. I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict, which is, I think it's overwhelming in my view.
Biden is expected to make more extensive remarks after the verdict is read. Derek Chauvin was charged with second and third degree murder, as well as manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. The maximum prison sentence for murder, too, under Minnesota law, is 40 years. U.S. troops are expected to fully withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11th. Today, House lawmakers heard from General Frank McKenzie, who oversees military operations in the Middle East and Afghanistan. He says he has grave doubts the Taliban will stick to its commitments.
If they want any form of future international recognition for Afghanistan, if they want any form of international support, they're going to have to keep to the agreements that they've made. We will be able to observe that and see it very clearly and directly whether or not they're able to do it.
McKenzie says the U.S. is ready to defend itself if our troops are attacked during the drawdown. New research indicates middle-aged people who sleep 6 hours a night or less might be more prone to dementia. The New York Times reports the study in the journal Nature Communications was conducted over about 25 years. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, and joining me right now is Charlie Pellet. And continuing to watch Netflix shares, they are definitely down here in the after hours following their latest quarterly update. Charlie, one other thing that we're watching, certainly here in and around New York, is the tourism industry, which was just decimated as a result of COVID.
Indeed. Let me just say, first of all, New York is an incredible town. We love tourists. Come visit. There's a lot to do here. But I was just absolutely dumbstruck by one of the numbers in our Bloomberg News story, and that is that roughly 200 of the city's 700 hotels do remain closed. So even though a lot of people want to come visit New York, hotel rooms, there are bargains to be had, but the city still is having a tough time filling hotel rooms. Another thing that I read in the story, the vice president for marketing at Statue Cruises, a recent Saturday, 4,100 people riding the ferry from Lower Manhattan to the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. That is a must-do when you're in New York.
Best deal in town.
Well, no, I'm talking
Staten
about
Island. Oh, you're talking about to the
the Statue Cruises to go over there. But yeah, I totally agree with you about the Staten Island ferry. Best deal in town. There's even an outlet mall now on the other side when you get to Staten Island. So, there are also museums on Staten Island, but absolutely right, best deal in town.
Yeah, Metropolitan Museum of Art has been averaging 7,000 daily visitors. That's up from 4,000 when it reopened last summer. American Museum of Natural History reporting a similar uptick. And on Monday, New York said it would raise the capacity limit for museums, zoos, and movie theaters. So it is slowly, definitely reopening.
Indeed. I went to the Museum of Natural History over the weekend. First time in roughly a year to get out. And, it's always a fascinating place. And it was good to go. And I was pleasantly surprised by how few people there were in the museum.
Yeah, well, it'll get busier. The city felt a lot busier this morning when I was coming in. Maybe it was because it was warmer. I don't know. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Charlie Pellet. Hey, just a quick reminder, Netflix shares down about 9.5%. User growth slowing after COVID-driven surge. Outlook for second quarter growth also missing estimates. And production delays meant lighter content for viewers. So just an update there. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We are just about 13 minutes away from getting a verdict. When we get it, we will pass it along to you live here on Bloomberg Radio. The jury in Minneapolis has reached a verdict in the George Floyd murder case. Again, that's just about 13 minutes away, scheduled for just about 4:30 New York time. We will have that for you as it happens. Stocks down for a second day. Rising virus cases around the world led to renewed concern over the continued economic impact, overshadowing a batch of solid corporate results. S&P down 28, a drop today of 0.7%. The Dow down 256, lower by about 0.7%. Nasdaq down 128, a drop of 0.9%. 10-year yield 1.56%. Gold up 0.4%, 17.79 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, 62.44 a barrel. Netflix shares tumbling after new streaming users lagged estimates. Netflix shares lower after hours by about 9.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed, and we're going to pick it up from you, Charlie. Thank you so much. Continue with Netflix. As Charlie mentioned, stock down around 10% here in the after hours. Reporting earnings, certainly a different number, and the company's been, safe to say, warning that things would be different, certainly on the other side of pandemic. Let's get into the quarter. Here with a look at that, John Ehrlichman, anchor of BNN Bloomberg's The Open, correspondent for CTV National News, with us from Toronto. So, John, what jumps out here at you?
Well, I think the obvious story is that there was a lot of excitement around Netflix last year, Carol. A lot of people were at home because of the pandemic, so they had a huge surge in subscribers in 2020. And you do see that in the number of new subscribers in both these first quarter results and their forecast for the current quarter, the second quarter. Those numbers are going to be hard comparables, and so the market's reacting to this. And also the fact that because of the pandemic, as much money as Netflix is putting to work on big productions around the globe, let's face it, all studios were impacted by COVID, so that kind of slowed things down with new releases that were coming out in the first 3 months of this year. And a company like Netflix, if they're all about subscriber growth, one of the easiest ways to grow your subscriber base is get the word out about a new program. So if they were a little challenged on that's kind of the 1-2 punch for the quarter.
Well, and this is where our own Chris Palmieri is asking on our Netflix blog on the terminal, says Netflix might have some explaining to do. The first quarter saw some of its biggest hits ever, including season 3 of the Karate Kid spinoff, the much talked about Shonda Rhimes drama Bridgerton, which came out on Christmas Day. People have been talking about that. People are also talking about Lupin, the French thriller, which 76 million households watch. So why so few new subscribers?
Well, I guess it depends on, it's just the expectations are super high for this company. I mean, at the end of the day, they still saw their subscriber growth up by 14% in the first quarter, still going to be up by 8% in the second quarter. But, you know, the law of large numbers, they've now got more than 200 million subscribers. They're only getting bigger, so the expectations get bigger. Actually, Bloomberg tracks where the analysts think they're going to be in a few years. And, you know, you go ahead 5 years from now, Carol, a lot of analysts on Wall Street think they'll be at 350 million subscribers.
Wow.
Look, as you know, I've been covering this company for, at this point, more than a decade. There's always a reaction on earnings day. It's still a pretty scary company. Now, I know Disney's had an incredible run over the last year with a huge explosion in the number of users. And at this point, you know, Disney basically at about half Netflix. And if they were to continue at this pace, who knows? They could get close really quickly. I thought it was kind of interesting, though. You know, Netflix has a habit of giving a shout out to the rivals in the shareholder letter that they put out. Today they took a bit of a shot at Disney, not naming them, but saying, quote, when comparing services, subscriber figures alone tell only part of the story, given bundles, discounts, and other promotions. And I think that's a dig at Disney. Certainly at some of the others, too, because every player in Hollywood right now is trying to juice their subscriber numbers. This is the game that Netflix invented. We all got obsessed with their subscriber numbers. Then Disney said, we're going to use that playbook, and now all the new services are trying to do that. The only thing I would add, Carol, is Netflix is pretty targeted in local markets around the world. So that is something they have very much championed, and they do have a lead on that. So if I look at their business, their Japanese and Korean audiences, their Mexican audience, those numbers are growing pretty substantially year over year. I know we often want to talk about the American titles that we're excited to watch as soon as they come onto the streaming platform. But because they're still doing a lot of those local language programs to try to juice the numbers in those markets, they do still ultimately have the lead on how that works. And I think the test will be, can some of the other players in Hollywood who are more designed for making a big Hollywood blockbuster and taking it global, do they have the bandwidth, or do they even want to follow the Netflix playbook? Do they really want to embrace what a particular local culture really gravitates towards and then run with it? Because, Netflix, by doing that, ironically, they got all these titles that probably from time to time you and I are watching a show that's unique to us from Germany or maybe from Mexico or somewhere in the Asia Pacific landscape, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good show. I never would have thought to.
This is something we were just talking a moment ago when Netflix earnings crossed, and we just got about a minute or so left here, John. Yeah. But I mean, what's the important audience? I mean, obviously the US is an important audience, but is it really about international growth going forward that Netflix really has to care about?
Well, I think the company is telling us focus on engagement. Now, this is still kind of a wacky one because we're basically beholden to whatever they tell us about engagement. Right. But they also say revenue. And I would say, the company just generated more than $7 billion in revenue for the quarter, and that number continues to go up. As always, you're just going to have to watch the costs that go into making all these shows. And I still think at the end of the day, what they really need, Carol, is I know they feel they've got some marquee franchises at this point. Mm-hmm. The one thing that Disney has had that's so powerful is they can just launch those marquee shows or films on the platform right now, and it really drives tune in. So I think Netflix is still trying to take some of that Disney special sauce, and we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to watch this streaming battle between all of these players.
Yeah, and listen, there's a point where either we all just continue adding on streaming services, and that's all we do, or the pie. I don't know. Is the pie so big? And with more, members vying for our attention, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, Discovery Plus, Paramount Plus, you name it, the pie is just so big. And so it doesn't mean it's not going to be, strong businesses for many players. But again, maybe the growth isn't there as much. I don't know.
And do these players who still have a TV channel, a marquee broadcast network, do they not put any of that content on television anymore? And then what does that mean for your traditional advertisers? So that's the balancing act for the traditional media companies right now. It's a fascinating landscape to watch.
What would you be asking the Netflix folks on the earnings call? What would you be like, listen, give me an answer on this. Like, I need some clarity.
How quickly can they really ramp up? I mean, they are so dedicated on getting all this money into the system and getting all these productions out. I would love to know, because COVID has been so complicated, and even in cities like Toronto where they have a huge film production industry, can they ramp up quickly there? Because I think if they can get back to making shows at a furious pace, again, that's the kind of thing that will drive tune in for their overall subscriber number growth. And then I'm always curious to get color on how they see the landscape. I would love to see if they would say more about Disney, because remember, these two had such a strong relationship. Right?
Yeah.
Netflix was using Disney content to grow for so many years, and Disney also learned from that. So what might they say about Disney? Because Disney, I mean, it's been explosive growth, and as I mentioned, the comments in the note to investors tonight would very much suggest they're trying to poke a couple of holes in that fast growth that we've seen from Disney Plus. Yeah,
throw in a little shade. Well, listen, it's going to make it even more interesting to watch some of the other streaming services and how they play out. Hey, John, always great analysis, and we really do appreciate you've been watching this one for so long. So terrific insight. John Ehrlichman, he's anchor at BNN Bloomberg's The Open, correspondent for CTV National News, on the phone from Toronto. So let's just reset for a moment, folks, because any moment, in a couple of minutes, we are expecting the verdict in the George Floyd murder case. Of course, Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes last May, will soon learn his fate. And so we are expecting that to cross at any moment. In the meantime, as we await that, let's bring in Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grasso. She's on the phone in New York City. So we've got, second and third degree murder that he's facing, also a manslaughter charge.
Right. He's facing 3 different charges, and the jury considers these separately. So they could come back with guilty on one and not guilty on another, depending on what they find. And it's basically goes from second degree unintentional murder, that's felony murder. That means that they have to find that Chauvin caused Floyd's death while committing or trying to commit a felony, in this case, third degree assault. The third degree murder charge is what's called depraved mind, without regard for human life. The basic gist is that it's extreme recklessness on Chauvin's part in causing Floyd's death. The second degree manslaughter is the lowest level. It's culpable negligence, and that means that it means gross negligence combined with recklessness, and that's basically the easiest charge for the jury to reach. But in every case, the jury has to first find that Chauvin caused Floyd's death and that the use of force was unreasonable.
So the quickness, would you say that this verdict has come back rather quickly?
I am shocked that it came back this quickly, just because normally a jury will go through all the evidence before they even start to talk about or take a vote on where they are. And so in this case, in about 11 hours, they've come to a decision on 3 different counts. After 11 hours, with all the testimony that was involved, and some of these charges are really difficult to distinguish between one and the other, the different factors. So I think it's really surprising they came back this soon. And normally when a jury comes back early, it is a prosecution verdict. I'm not saying that this is a prosecution verdict, because you never know what a jury's going to do. We've been surprised so many times in the past. But for this jury, in this length of time, this means, first of all, that the defense wasn't able to do what they were basically trying to do, was to get one juror, just one juror, to find that in Chauvin's defense, to get one juror hung up on a detail or some kind of conflict that the defense brought up, which the defense brought up many different things. That didn't happen. The jury's unanimous, and the jury's unanimous in 11 hours on 3 counts. So I think the prosecution has to be feeling very good right now.
Well, just to remind everyone who's listening here on Bloomberg Radio, we are anticipating any moment for the jury in the case of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who was charged with the death of George Floyd. We are anticipating that it will cross the Bloomberg at any moment. We are right now talking with our own June Grasso, Bloomberg News legal analyst. Another headline I do want to bring to you that just crossed. Manchester City says it's going to start to withdraw from that Super League. So it would be the first club to confirm it's withdrawing from that Super League plan. Of course, that was a big story yesterday, just broke, but already a lot of criticism about the creation of a new big football league over there in Europe. And of course, you're already seeing some of these major franchises, soccer franchises, already pulling back on it. So June, at this point, could we possibly see a clean sweep? In other words, all 3 charges that he is found guilty, is that likely?
I don't know if it's likely, but it's certainly possible that we could see that. As I said, the swiftness that this jury came down with this decision on could mean that they were just of one mind and they just went 1, 2, 3 down the 3 charges. Of course, that second-degree unintentional murder, the felony murder, that seems like a stretch for the prosecution here, perhaps, because they have to find that Chauvin, while he caused Floyd's death, he was intentionally inflicting substantial bodily harm, so intentionally committing third-degree assault, and in the course of that, George Floyd died. It doesn't have to be that he intentionally caused George Floyd's death, but that he intentionally caused that injury, and that seems like a stretch for an officer in this in this capacity. However, there was a lot of proof, and there were so many experts. The prosecution called expert after expert to try to show that there was second-degree unintentional murder. There was several medical experts who testified that Floyd died from a lack of oxygen because of the way he was restrained. A use of force expert said it was unreasonable to have Floyd in that prone position for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And there were officers, including the police chief, who said no reasonable officer would have done what Chauvin did. So it is possible, but it would be quite a feat on the prosecution's part, I think.
You talked about the rapidity in terms of the jury coming back so quickly, and I do wonder, this was something, we've talked about it so much here on Bloomberg, that because of the pandemic, so many people were home, so many people saw the video of Derek Chauvin on the neck of George Floyd over and over and over again. How could that not have impacted a jury?
I don't know the answer to that question, because I can't imagine that there wasn't some kind of impact just from all the publicity, all the protests that were happening right outside the courthouse every single day. There were protests there saying, justice for George Floyd, which everyone wants justice for George Floyd. There's no doubt about that. But you also have to consider that the officer who's charged in our system of justice is entitled to a fair trial as well. And I think what the defense has been trying to do throughout this trial is trying to put before the court instances where he thought that things were not fair, causing him to object, and then that would be a point for appeal. So one of the points for appeal already is going to be that he asked for the trial to be moved out of Minnesota, saying that Chauvin couldn't get a fair trial in Minnesota, and the judge refused that. Just yesterday, after the jury started to deliberate, and while they were still in the courthouse, the defense attorney talked about prosecutorial misconduct, saying that some of the things that the prosecutor had said in his closing argument, which I have to admit, my ears perked up when I heard some of these things, because he called the defense arguments nonsense, and he said that the defense was telling stories. This was in rebuttal, and the defense objected, and the judge sustained that objection, but he didn't grant a mistrial, obviously. And the judge also said, there's been a lot of publicity about what Congresswoman Maxine Waters said, and the judge also said that he didn't think it would affect this jury, but it might be something to consider. So there's a lot of room here for appellate issues, and I think that at this point, that probably is where the defense is going to hang its hat. But it's been really establishing that record for appeal since the beginning.
Well, and I just want to remind everyone that it was just about 3:30 that we did see the headline crossing about the jury reaching a verdict in the trial of George Floyd's accused killer. And apparently it was a brief court note, which I assume, June, that they typically are. It's going to be read in open court between 3:30 and 4 p.m. That's local time, so it's an hour difference there in Minneapolis. Minnesota, of course, on Central Time. The verdict will be issued at 4:30 p.m. in New York. The total amount of time the jury spent deliberating was less than 11 hours, June.
And another thing is that they didn't even ask one question. Yeah. So you had a jury that came to this decision in 11 hours with these complicated charges, which even as I'm looking through them, I have to look and say, well, where's intentional on that? Where's the mindset on that? They decided what was going on through Derek Chauvin's mind, which is what they had to do, that he caused Floyd's death and that his use of force was unreasonable. And then they decided these 3 charges, what gradations it would be. And that, without a jury question, if you've ever sat in a jury in a trial where the judge reads the jury instructions to the jury, as lawyers, you sit there and you go, how will the jury ever be able to figure this out? And a lot of times the judges don't let the juries have the instructions read to them. So often you have the juries coming out just to ask questions about the instructions. What does this mean?
Right.
And the judge will just read the instruction again. They never tell them anything in addition to what the instruction says. This jury came to this decision without any kind of help from the judge, without any readbacks. I thought for sure there'd be some readbacks of expert testimony, because it's so hard to get it the first time. So this is why I'm really surprised. I had expected another day or two before a verdict would come in.
Yeah, listen, anybody
remember,
go ahead. No,
yeah,
please.
Go ahead. Well, I just also wanted to say that this is also it's a diverse jury. There are 4 white women, 2 white men, 3 black men, 1 black woman, and 2 multiracial women. They range in age from 20s to their 60s. There's a chemist, a nurse, an auditor, a grandmother. So it's a really diverse jury as well.
Yeah, and I just saw on Twitter that the reading of the verdict will be live streamed from the courtroom in downtown Minneapolis. So a lot of news organizations obviously going to be putting that as well. Yeah, it's very interesting, June. And I don't know, at this point, like you said, we talked about whether or not we could see all 3 charges, whether or not he's found guilty on all of them. The serious, though, the most serious one, again, is what? The 3rd-degree murder?
Second-degree unintentional murder. It's what we normally call felony murder, and that means a murder committed in the course of a felony. So let's say someone robs a store and someone dies during the robbery. That would be a typical example of a felony murder. So in this case, the felony would be 3rd-degree assault. That's intentional infliction of substantial bodily harm. So that the jury would have to find that Chauvin intended to assault Floyd and inflict substantial bodily harm, and obviously George Floyd died in the process. That carries up to 40 years in prison. However, and this is sort of interesting because we've been hearing through this carries 40 years, the 3rd-degree murder carries 25 years, 2nd-degree manslaughter 10 years, but under Minnesota guidelines, the sentencing guidelines, each conviction of murder really carries about 12 and a half years in prison under the guidelines and 4 years for the manslaughter charge. And the judge would be the one to decide the exact length and whether there would be, served at the same time or back-to-back, consecutive or concurrent. And the prosecution here is seeking sentencing above the guidelines range. They're using aggravating factors, for example, that Chauvin was a police officer in a position of authority, that his crime was witnessed by several children, and they had the testimony of that child, a 9-year-old girl who said that it made her sad and kind of mad, and also that Floyd was particularly vulnerable. So the prosecution already had in its mind that what the sentencing guidelines were and is going to try to, amplify them, divert up.
June, what's the analysis on Derek Chauvin not testifying? Was that a smart move? Should he have? I'm just curious the analysis that you've heard on this.
Well, people today, Chauvin today may say he should have testified, but if the verdict comes out the way it did, but everyone I spoke to, every legal expert said that there was no way he should have testified, because what would have happened is, first of all, the only way that he could have told the jury what was going through his mind was to testify. So that was the factor in favor of testifying. But on the other side were all the other factors that they could bring up: his past, some of the problems he's had with civilians in the past, that they could basically take him through that video, moment by moment, and stop and say, well, what were you thinking here? You didn't think, wait, when he was crying out here, you didn't think that was enough? Wait, when this person came and said that he needed medical attention, why didn't you allow that to happen? It would have been just a nightmare that he couldn't have gotten through. So I think that overwhelmingly, in fact, every single person I talked to said there's no way that he should have taken the stand in his own defense.
All right. We are talking, of course, with Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grosso. She's on the phone in New York City. We are waiting any moment, expecting it to cross the Bloomberg terminal. The verdict in the George Floyd murder case, of course, on trial has been Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer. And we did talk about the jury deliberations, short deliberations of 11 hours. So as June has mentioned, pretty quick in terms of coming back. But as soon as they do cross, we will bring them to you. I also do want to bring in Bloomberg News legal reporter Eric Larson. Just a reminder that Chauvin was charged with second and third degree murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. June, of course, walking us through those and the possible sentencing guidelines for them. Eric, what are you anticipating here in terms of the outcome?
Well, I think a lot of folks here are probably anticipating sort of the same thing with such a serious, high-profile case and such relatively short deliberations after a nearly 3-week trial. The tea leaves kind of suggest that there might be a guilty verdict here, potentially on all 3 counts. You would sort of anticipate that if there was some disagreement amongst the jurors during the deliberations, that they might have had some questions. Sometimes they send out notes, to the judge to get clarifications on things, and there was none of that. So it does suggest that they've come to a pretty quick conclusion here, and that it could be guilty.
What are you kind of looking out for as a result of this this verdict? What are the key things beyond, obviously, the key headline here?
Well, it's going to quickly turn to the possibility of an appeal. I think obviously there's going to be rallies and protests, and whichever way it goes, and there's a big national conversation there. But the lawyer for the former police officer Chauvin is going to quickly be looking to how he can get an appeal here. He signaled that right away at the end of the closing arguments yesterday when he called out Congresswoman Maxine Waters for her comments about the need for further protests and confrontation if they do not get a guilty verdict, suggesting that was cause for a mistrial and for an appeal. The judge denied the request for mistrial, but the judge said flat out during the end of the hearing when the jury was away that he agreed that the Congresswoman's comments were inappropriate and didn't think that she should not have weighed in, and that there could be a reason for an appeal there.
June, come on in on this in terms of the possibility of an appeal.
I agree with Eric completely. Before we were talking about some of the things that were said during the closing arguments that I thought were surprising for the prosecutor, which the defense brought up after. But the defense also talked about the sort of the whole media circus about this case. And he at different points during the trial, he kept asking for the case to be moved out of Minnesota, or at one point he asked for the jury to be sequestered early. So he had different points where he made his record, and even though knowing that at this point the judge wasn't going to do anything about moving the trial. But I think that's one of his biggest points of appeal.
Right.
And Eric's right. He mentioned after the jury had gone to deliberate yesterday, he started listing some of the reasons that he's probably going to put forward as appellate issues. I think he has a lot of them.
Well, and I do wonder, though, Eric, June and I were talking about this earlier. This was something because of the pandemic. We were all home. We all followed this so closely. Maybe we wouldn't have it so much if it wasn't because of the pandemic, saw the video over and over and over again. And I do wonder if the case had been held elsewhere, do you think it really would make a difference in terms of a potential outcome?
I've thought about that, and I just don't think so. Others have pointed out, I think the video was viewed over 1 billion times just in the first, short period it came out. And it doesn't matter where you were in America, everyone saw that video. As we all know, there were protests all across the country. Some of them turned violent. It was a pretty, crazy time, frankly. So I'm not sure which corner of the country they could have moved the trial to where everyone wouldn't have had the same information going into a trial like this, which is they saw the video, they knew what happened, they had the basics of it. And a lot of people do form opinions about defendants and cases, and that doesn't automatically mean that they're going to be thrown off a jury or that they can't come to a non-biased conclusion. I covered the trial of Bernie Madoff's 5 employees, and everyone knew who they were and knew that they had an opinion about Madoff being a fraudster, but they said we can still come to a decision and be non-biased, and that judges accept that.
Right, exactly. Hey, let's remind everybody, first of all, we're talking with Bloomberg News legal reporter Eric Larson, Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grasso. We are anticipating the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes last May. We are expected to soon learn his fate. He has been charged with second and third degree murder and manslaughter. We are awaiting that to cross the Bloomberg. That will be read in court. We then expect to hear from the Minnesota Attorney General to hold a presser after that. We are also expecting some comments from the Minnesota governor. So all of this certainly to come. I do wonder too, Eric, is there any kind of legal precedent that might come out of this in terms of future cases, especially involving the police?
You know, that's such a difficult thing to predict. There have been so many cases where police killings have been caught on video, or even killings of other black people by white individuals, where the verdict didn't go the way the victims' families would have wanted, and it seemed that there was a mountain of evidence, but that they were just allowed to given the presumption of innocence kind of because they had a badge. That's been the complaint, all along here. And we have to wonder, would this case be so seemingly open and closed if you hadn't had so much video evidence? And we're going to continue to have, just being the nature of a huge country with so many police, there's going to continue to be these encounters that they're not always going to be caught on video, or the video might not be as clear or as long or go as viral. And what happens in those cases? We just won't know.
Right, and we do know in other cases where things are not known until several years when a video comes out and then it's brought to light. Let's remind everybody it was a 15-day trial. There were 45 witnesses and less than 11 hours of jury deliberations in the case and charges against Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer. June, what do you think in terms of precedent as a result of this outcome?
I don't think there'll be precedent in the legal sense of the term. Legally, precedent is something that's established in the case, and
or
then
social
you can
mindset
use that in other. Yeah, I think there might be, and what people are hoping, what justice advocates are hoping, is that there'll be a different mindset, because right now in our country, up until this point, as Eric pointed out, you can go case after case after case against police, even some where there was some video evidence where police were not convicted. So I think the hope is that this will open juries up perhaps to seeing police and the job they do, and not putting them on a pedestal and allowing them to get away with something that they shouldn't get away with. So sort of taking police down to the level of the average citizen and making them responsible for their actions, which in a lot of ways juries have let the police escape at times. I mean, we've seen, verdict after verdict where people thought that there would be a conviction against police and were shocked when there wasn't. So I think it's a mindset more than anything else. And that's what probably the protests are all about, that changing that mindset of, and also that it will lead police to act better. I mean, the fact that you have all these incidents on videotape, I would think that alone would lead police to act in a certain way, to conform to the requirements of their conduct. However, it doesn't seem to always work that way. So I think it's a difference in mindset.
I do want to also point out that the courthouse area that where this verdict will be read, it has been boarded up. Minnesota really bracing for that verdict in the case of Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis. So I do, Eric, let's go back to, and June was great in terms of breaking it down, but we are talking about second and third degree murder charges. We're talking about a manslaughter charge. In terms of concerns where people might say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. A manslaughter charge, June had mentioned this is the lowest charge, easiest for the jury to reach. Is that a charge that might surprise you if it comes in terms guilty and the rest are not?
I would definitely be surprised, only because it does seem that the state really put on a lot of evidence. As I'm sure you said before, most of the trial was spent with the state's witnesses, and they really spelled out each of these charges and all of the different elements of each one from every different angle in a pretty thorough way. So, I mean, when you think about the second-degree murder, that one already is probably lower than some people would say he should have been charged with, because a lot of people say it should be first-degree murder based on what they saw. But they said that if it can prove that he unintentionally killed Floyd while he was committing a felony, that's the most serious charge there. And they didn't have to prove intent. They basically just had to prove that he killed George Floyd while he was committing the felony of assault. So, I would be surprised if it was just manslaughter. Also, because of how quickly the deliberations took place. If they were going to scrap the first two charges and focus on this one, I would have expected them to have to deliberate on that much longer. Just considering the amount of evidence and the seriousness of the case.
And first degree murder, and you folks have to kind of clarify this for me, this has to be willful, it has to be premeditated. June, what's the distinction here?
Well, felony murder is a murder that's committed in the course of a felony. As Eric said, you don't have to show the intent of Chauvin to commit the murder, but you do have to show his intent to inflict substantial bodily harm. So that's where the intent is there. And it's easier to achieve. It's easier to get a jury to convict on that than on first degree murder. First degree murder, I think you'd have to show, Eric, I don't know. I think that the intent, that would be very difficult to show here, that he intended to kill George Floyd.
You're right. You'd have to be inside his head, and that's a difficult thing to prove unless there's some evidence of premeditation, which you wouldn't expect to find. It would have been more like just a knee-jerk reaction to what was happening and his decision that he at that moment decided to kill Floyd, and that would have been very difficult to prove, I would imagine.
The two of you have been following the testimony, the witnesses, as I mentioned, 45 witnesses, certainly for both sides, the defense and the prosecution. June, what do you think was the most damning?
Well, there are sort of levels of damning in this case. There were the eyewitness testimony, which I'm sure, brought tears to the eyes of many people that were in the room and some of the witnesses who cried. So there was that, which was really moving. And I think as far as the case is concerned, of course, you have the expert witnesses that the prosecution put on one after the other, talking about, Chauvin's conduct in this case, how he was, unreasonable in his use of force, how he didn't comport with the requirements for police officers in using force. So I think that their expert witnesses were really amazing, just the number of them, and also the fact that the defense could not counter the expert witnesses. The defense had a few witnesses, and each of their witnesses on cross-examination conceded some important point. So I think the quality of the witnesses that the prosecution had was really superb and probably, the strongest part of their case. And of course, over all of this is the video of the 9 minutes and 12 seconds. That has to be the most important evidence in the case.
Eric, what about your thoughts on this?
It's a good question because, as June says, there were a lot of pretty strong witnesses. I would say that for the jury, potentially, the most influential might have been the police chief of Minneapolis, Madaria Arredondo. As we discussed before, how rare it is for these cases to be charged, let alone brought to trial and convicted. In a lot of those cases, you don't have a police chief coming out to testify against a former employee. So, the seriousness of those optics there made the testimony pretty severe. He said that Chauvin broke, policy by holding Floyd in that way for such a long period and not turning him over. Fairly basic training procedures that he apparently ignored, according to the police chief. But of course, also the bystander testimony was very, very powerful.
Hey, just to reset everyone, we are anticipating the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck. That was more than 9 minutes. We've all seen that video. That, of course, happened last May. He will soon learn the outcome of the jury deliberations, which were less than 11 hours. It was a 15-day trial. And we did talk about 45 witnesses. There are 3 charges, charged with second and third degree murder, also manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. While The maximum prison sentence for murder 2 under Minnesota law is 40 years. He would probably face at most 12 and a half years if convicted, given state sentencing guidelines. And I'm talking with, of course, our Bloomberg News legal reporter, Eric Larson, along with Bloomberg News legal analyst, June Grasso. So, June, we're awaiting the outcome of this. I know you have a lot of conversations around this case in particular, and we talked about this earlier. Are you anticipating that he is found guilty on all three, or what would make the most sense based on the trial, based on the evidence and what you heard?
Oh, you're going to make me do this, huh, Carol?
I am curious. I am curious.
Right. Well,
especially the short amount of deliberations here.
Right. Just, and of course with the precaution that this has absolutely no bearing on what may happen, what's going to happen. But I think considering the shortness of the jury deliberations, the fact that there was no note from the jury, I think that they may come back with guilty on all the counts. I think that maybe they went in there and they decided, here were the facts, here's what happened. There was no defense that was, reasonable from their point of view. There was nothing they saw in what Chauvin did that showed that there was a reasonable use of force. An officer is permitted to use force, but it has to be reasonable. And I just think that they might come down with guilty on all three, but I could be wrong. There's no doubt that I could be wrong because I learned never to second guess juries, except when Carol Massar forces me to.
Well, I'm just
make Eric do it now.
I know, and you're such a good sport. And you're such a good sport because you're going to stick around because we are awaiting the outcome. We are expecting that verdict to cross any moment from now. Of course, who's been on trial, Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck, and the jury has been deliberating for less than 11 hours. It's a 15-day trial, 45 witnesses, but we are anticipating that we will know that verdict any moment now when it comes to those three charges, second and third degree murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. June's going to stay with us, our Bloomberg News legal analyst. She's going to join the team of Jeannie Sean Zano and Rick Davis. They are going to take over from here and bring you that verdict. They're going to take you through Bloomberg Sound On. Jeannie and Rick, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Carol. And as Carol mentioned, I am Jeannie Shanzano here with Rick Davis. We are awaiting the trial outcome in the Derek Chauvin trial. As Carol mentioned, after about 11 hours, 10 to 11 hours of deliberation, we heard this afternoon that the jury is come back with a verdict much quicker, I think, than many experts expected. And so we are just waiting that, but probably between 4:35 or 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. Chauvin is facing 3 counts. They all stand alone. The most serious is second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. So 3 counts, and as June Grasso mentioned accurately so, with that quick of a turnaround, seems like there wasn't much dissension on the jury. Rick, what are your thoughts as we await this sort of momentous moment?
Well, I think you're right. What June was describing, a jury that asked no questions and deliberated for I would say only 11 hours, although that seems like a long time if you're a juror sitting in a room, I'm sure. It seems to me that this is a relatively non-controversial